Welcome, whether it's your first time here or you're returning. Tonight's video contains ghost stories and haunted encounters, perfect for calm, late-night listening. If you enjoy the stories, like, subscribe, and comment your location below. Settle in, close your eyes if you like, and let the stories begin. Story 1. Every tenant before me broke the lease because of the same shadow. The lease smelled of mildew and cheap ink when Mr. Finch slid it across his cluttered desk. "Apartment 3B, he said, not meeting my eyes, his pen hovering over the signature line. His knuckles were white. Rent's $499, utilities included, 6-month minimum. He cleared his throat, a dry rattling sound. Just one condition. He tapped a clause buried near the bottom. Tenant acknowledges awareness of prior occupancy irregularities and waives all claims related to visual or auditory anomalies within the unit, particularly after 8:03 p.m. I squinted. What does that even mean? Finch finally looked up. His eyes were the color of weak tea, ringed with dark circles. "The last 5 tenants," he said quietly, "all broke their leases within a month. Some left in the middle of the night. One, well, she didn't leave. The police found her sitting in the bathtub with the taps running, staring at the ceiling, catatonic. They said she kept whispering about the man who stands where the light won't reach." He pushed a thick manila folder toward me. Inside were photos. A hastily abandoned suitcase spilling clothes into the hallway. A dining table set for 2, plates covered in dust. A child's teddy bear left on a windowsill. And police reports, all listing unspecified psychological distress as the reason for early termination. "The building's old," Finch muttered, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Old buildings hold on to things. Shadows get sticky." He wouldn't say more. I signed anyway. After the foreclosure, after sleeping in my car for 3 weeks, $400 for a 1-bedroom with working heat felt like salvation, even if the salvation came with shadows. Crestview Arms was a hulking brick relic from the 1920s, sandwiched between a laundromat and a boarded-up pawn shop on the wrong side of downtown. My unit was on the 3rd floor, a narrow layout with high ceilings, a single grimy window overlooking a fire escape, and a persistent smell of boiled cabbage that clung to the wallpaper. The first night, I chalked the silence up to exhaustion. The building groaned like all old structures do. Pipes clanked. Floorboards sighed. I fell asleep to the distant wail of sirens. I woke at 2:17 a.m., certain I wasn't alone. The streetlight outside cast a pale, jaundiced glow through the window, painting stripes across the room. In the far corner, where the light from the window didn't quite reach, the darkness was thicker, solid, shaped. A man's silhouette, tall and lean, stood motionless beside the closet door. Not a trick of the light, not a coat on a hook. It had depth, weight. It didn't breathe. It didn't move. It just watched. My blood turned to ice. I lay frozen, counting my pulse in my throat until dawn bleached the room gray. The corner was empty, just peeling floral wallpaper and dust motes dancing in the weak light. Stress, I told myself, sleep deprivation, the streetlight playing tricks. The next night, I left the overhead light on. I drank 3 cups of coffee, forcing myself to stay awake on the lumpy couch. 8:03 p.m. came and went. Nothing. Relief washed over me until I blinked. He was there, not in the corner this time, standing just inside my bedroom doorway, backlit by the hall light I'd left burning. The shadow had no face, no features, just an absence of light shaped like a man in a long coat, hands hanging loosely at his sides. He hadn't been there a second ago. I hadn't heard the door open. My breath hitched. I fumbled for the lamp beside me. When the light flared, the doorway was empty. Only my own trembling shadow stretched long and thin across the floorboards. It became a ritual. Every night around 8:03 p.m., the lights would flicker once, always once. Then he'd appear, sometimes in the kitchen, leaning against the stove, sometimes sitting in the armchair I'd salvaged from the curb, his shadow head tilted as if listening. He never moved, never made a sound, but the air around him grew cold and still, smelling faintly of damp stone and old pennies. I'd turn on every lamp, blast the radio, scream curses at the empty space. The lights would stabilize, the cold would retreat, he'd vanish. But the smell lingered, and the feeling of being watched never left. I asked Finch about it. He was sweeping the lobby's cracked tile floor, back turned. "They all see him," he said flatly, not stopping his rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. Mrs. Gable in 09, she was a seamstress, said he'd stand over her sewing machine at night, his shadow hand resting on the pedal. She'd wake to find all her thread spools unraveled, tangled like spider webs. He paused, leaning on his broom. Then there was Ben Carter, musician. Swore a shadow would sit on his piano bench after midnight, fingers hovering over the keys. Ben would hear Chopin drifting from his apartment at 3 a.m., but when he'd burst in, the piano was silent, cold. Ben left his saxophone on the fire escape, never came back for it. Finch's voice dropped. The worst was Sarah Miller, last year. She had a little girl, Emily, 3 years old. He swallowed hard. Emily started drawing pictures, always the same thing, a tall black man with no eyes standing in a yellow room. Sarah said Emily called him Mr. No Light. One Tuesday, Sarah found Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit in the bathtub, soaking wet. Emily was sitting on the bathroom floor, shivering, pointing at the corner. She kept saying, "He put Mr. Bunny in the water, Mama. He doesn't like warm things." Finch's hand trembled on the broom handle. Sarah broke her lease that night, drove to her sister's in another state, changed her number. Emily still won't sleep without a nightlight. He finally looked at me, his eyes haunted. He doesn't hurt you, not physically. He just watches. Until the watching becomes too much. Until you feel like you're dissolving under his gaze, that's when you break. The shadow started moving, not teleporting. Walking. Slow, deliberate steps from the corner to the window, from the kitchen to the door. His footsteps made no sound, but the floorboards dipped beneath his unseen weight. Frost bloomed on the window pane where he stood longest. One rainy Thursday, I came home from my night shift at the diner to find all my spice jars lined up on the counter in perfect alphabetical order, something I'd never done. The shadow stood by the sink, his outline faint but unmistakable in the steam rising from the kettle I'd left on. I started researching. The public library's microfiche archives held a brittle newspaper clipping from November 12, 1937. Local optometrist perishes in Crestview arms fire. Dr. Alistair Vance, 42, died when a blaze started in his third floor, apartment Unit 3B, after he fell asleep reading. His body was never recovered. The fire was deemed unusually intense, consuming organic matter completely while sparing structural beams. The article mentioned his reclusive nature. He rarely saw patients after dusk, claiming the light hurts the eyes too much in the dark. His assistant, a woman named Clara, was quoted, "He was a good man, but after his wife died, he stopped letting light into his life. Literally. He boarded up his windows." This clipping had a photo. Dr. Vance, sharp-featured, with deep-set eyes that seemed to stare right through the camera lens. And something odd. He stood slightly off-center in the frame, as if avoiding the light. That night, the shadow didn't wait for 8:03 p.m. He stood in the center of my living room at 6:45 p.m., while daylight still bled through the window. He was clearer now, less like an absence, more like a stain on reality. I could see the suggestion of a collar, the line of a coat buttoned to the throat. His head was tilted down as if studying the floorboards. Then, slowly, he raised his shadow face toward me. No eyes, just smooth, featureless darkness where they should be. I screamed, not out of fear, but rage, pure, exhausted fury. "What do you want?" I shouted back and toward the door. "Why won't you leave me alone?" The lights didn't flicker. The shadow didn't vanish. He just stood there, and from the empty space where his mouth should be, a sound emerged, not a voice, but a vibration in the air itself, like a tuning fork struck deep underground. "See, you see me?" The words weren't in my ears. They were in my bones, in a hollow behind my ribs. Others looked away, pretended I was not. But you see, the shadow took a single step forward. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged thickly. The vibration came again, softer now, almost pleading. "So tired of the dark. Show me the light." He wasn't threatening me. He was begging. I didn't run. I walked to the window, unlatched it, threw it open wide. Cold November air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and distant traffic. I dragged my armchair, the one he favored, beneath the window. Then I stood beside it, my back to the streetlight's glow. "Here," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I see you. Now see this." For a long moment, nothing happened. The shadow remained frozen in the center of the room. Then, slowly, he turned, not toward the window, toward me. His featureless face lifted. The vibration trembled in the air. "Too bright. Hurts." "It's supposed to hurt," I said softly. "That's how you know it's real." He took another step, then another. Each movement was stiff, reluctant, as if pushing through deep water. He stopped inches from the armchair. The streetlight fell across him, not banishing him, but changing him. His edges blurred. Wisps of darkness curled away like smoke. For the first time, I saw details. The threadbare wool of his coat sleeve, the dust on his shadow shoes, the deep hollows where his eyes should be, not empty, but filled with a slow, swirling darkness like ink in water. He reached out a hand, not toward me, but toward the light spilling through the window. His shadow fingers passed through the beam. They didn't burn. They shimmered, dissolving at the edges into something almost silver. "Warm," the vibration sighed. "So long. Cold." He sat in the armchair, not heavily, like a man, but like mist settling. The frost on the window began to melt. The smell of damp stone faded, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of rain. He tilted his shadow face up, directly into the streetlight's glow. And he did something I'd never imagined. He relaxed. His shoulders lost their rigid set. His head leaned back against the chair. The swirling darkness in his eye sockets slowed, calming like still water. "Thank you," he breathed, the words barely a whisper in the air. Clara, she tried, but she was afraid. They all were, afraid of the dark man in the corner. He paused. The light seemed to thicken around him, almost golden. I was not always shadow. I was Alistair. I loved light once, loved my wife, loved the way sunlit dust danced in my office. Then the fire, it took my body, took the light, left only this hunger to be seen, not as a monster, as a man. He looked at me, those dark pits holding a depth of sorrow that made my throat tighten. They lock their doors, draw their curtains, pretend I am not. But you opened a window. You sat with me in the light. He began to fade, not vanishing. Unmaken. His edges grew translucent, blending with the moonlight, now joining the street lamp's glow. The chair creaked softly beneath him, a real human sound. The watching is done, he whispered. Tell Finch, the lease holds. Tell him Alistair is warm now. He was gone, truly gone. Not a stain on the wall, not a chill in the air, just an empty armchair bathed in light and the gentle rain whispering against the window. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair, watching the dawn paint the sky peach and gold. The apartment felt different, lighter. The smell of boiled cabbage was gone, replaced by the clean scent of rain-washed brick. At 7 a.m., I walked downstairs. Finch was already in the lobby, sweeping the same patch of floor. He didn't look up as I approached. Another night, huh? He muttered. I heard you shouting, knew you'd break by. I didn't break, I said. He stopped sweeping, slowly raised his head. His eyes widened. Your shadow, he stammered. It's normal. I glanced at the tile floor. My shadow stretched long and ordinary behind me in the lobby's fluorescent light. No extra darkness clung to my heels. No shape lingered in the corners of the room. He's gone, Finch, I said quietly. Alistair Vance. He's not in 3B anymore. Finch dropped his broom. It clattered on the tiles. He sank onto the front desk stool, his face ashen. You saw him? Properly? He sat in my chair, in the light. I pulled the lease from my pocket, the pages crisp. He told me to tell you the lease holds, that he's warm now. Finch covered his face with shaking hands. His shoulders heaved, not with sobs, but with a deep, shuddering release. When he looked up, tears tracked through the dust on his cheeks. I was a superhero when he died, he whispered. I was just a kid. My dad was the manager. We didn't go in after the fire. The heat was too intense. We assumed he was gone, but for weeks after, tenants reported things. Shadows moving, cold spots. A man in a long coat standing in corners. Dad thought it was grief. Playing tricks. Then Mrs. Gable saw him. Then Ben Carter. Dad got scared. He sealed off the unit, changed the locks, pretended 3B didn't exist. Finch's voice broke. But the shadows kept coming. In other apartments, on other floors. My dad, he couldn't take it. Moved away. Left me the building. Left me with him. He wiped his eyes roughly. I thought if I kept renting it out, kept people moving through, the shadow would get bored, would move on. But it never did. It always came back to 3B, waiting. I placed a hand on the scarred wood of the front desk. He wasn't waiting for you to leave. He was waiting for someone to see him. Finch nodded slowly, a fragile hope dawning in his tired eyes. What did he look like? In the light? Tired, I said. Sad. Human. 2 days later, I repainted the walls of 3B, sunshine yellow. I bought new curtains sheer enough to let the light flood in. I left the window open whenever the weather allowed. The apartment never felt cold again. The only shadow that lingered was mine, stretching long and ordinary across the floorboards in the late afternoon sun. Finch hasn't raised my rent. He even fixed the leak of faucet in the kitchen. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit in the armchair by the window, reading. And in the corner of my eye, just for a second, I think I see a shimmer in the air, a warmth on the edge of perception, not a shadow, a presence, settled. Last week, a young woman with tired eyes and a suitcase signed a lease for apartment 2A. As Finch handed her the keys, he paused. "One thing," he said gently. "If you ever see a shadow where the light won't reach, don't look away. Open a window, turn on a lamp, sit with it a while." He smiled, a real smile this time. Some shadows just need to remember what it feels like to be warm. The new tenant nodded, bemused. I watched from the third-floor window as she carried her boxes inside, and for the first time in years, the lobby of Crestview Arms didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a threshold, a place where light finally had learned how to stay. I still keep the street light outside my window unblocked. I still sit in the armchair after dusk, a book in my lap, the room bathed in golden light. Sometimes, when the rain patters against the glass, I swear I hear the faintest sigh, a sound like dust motes dancing in a sunbeam, not a vibration, a breath, resting. I close my book, smile into the warm, ordinary dark. "Good night, Alistair," I whisper. The shadows on the wall don't move. They just hold the light. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The hotel clerk gave me room 13, then whispered, "Don't answer if it knocks twice." Rain lashed against the windshield as I pulled into the gravel lot of the Blackwood Inn just past midnight, the wipers struggling to keep pace with the downpour. The GPS had rerouted me 3 times thanks to washed-out back roads, and what should have been a 4-hour drive from the city had stretched into 7 hours of white-knuckle navigating through storm-slicked mountain passes. My eyes burned with exhaustion, my neck stiff from hours hunched over the steering wheel. The Blackwood Inn wasn't my intended stop. It hadn't even been on my original route. But when the last gas station attendant warned me about the bridge out ahead and pointed toward the flickering neon vacancy sign in the distance, I didn't hesitate. Any roof was better than none. The lobby was dimly lit and smelled of mildew and old wood smoke. A single bulb hung above the check-in desk, casting long shadows across peeling floral wallpaper. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as weathered as the building itself, deep lines carved around his eyes, hair more silver than gray, fingers stained yellow from decades of cigarettes, though no ashtray was visible. He didn't look up as I approached, his attention fixed on a ledger open before him, pen scratching slowly across the page. "Room for the night?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. He nodded without speaking, still writing. When he finally set the pen down, he slid a brass key across the counter toward me. It was cold and heavy, the number 13 stamped into its head. "Room 13, he said, his voice a dry rasp like stones grinding together. "End of the hall on the left." I reached for the key, but before my fingers could close around it, his hand shot out and gripped my wrist. His skin was papery thin, surprisingly strong. He leaned forward, his breath smelling faintly of peppermint and something else, something metallic like old blood. His eyes pale blue and unnervingly sharp, locked onto mine. "Don't answer if it knocks twice," he whispered, so low I almost missed it over the drum and rain outside. Then he released my wrist and stepped back, his expression shut and closed as if the moment had never happened. "Checkout's at 11. I stood there for a second, stunned, the words echoing in my skull. Don't answer if it knocks twice. Not someone. It. Before I could ask what he meant, he'd turned away, busying himself with the ledger again, effectively dismissing me. My exhaustion warred with a prickle of unease, but logic won out. Old hotels had quirks. Superstitious staff. Probably just a local ghost story he'd told all the guests for kicks. I pocketed the key and headed for the stairs. The hallway on the second floor was narrow and poorly lit, the carpet threadbare and damp underfoot. Room 13 was exactly where he'd said. End of the hall, door painted a chipped black that seemed to absorb the weak light from the single fixture overhead. The key turned with a gritty resistance, the lock protesting decades of use. Inside the room was smaller than I expected, but clean enough. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a scarred wooden dresser, a single armchair by the window overlooking the storm-ravaged parking lot. The air smelled stale but not unpleasant, like old books and lemon polish. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, too tired to care about sheets or pajamas. Sleep hit me like a physical blow. I woke to darkness and silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness that pressed against the windows like a held breath. My phone read 2:47 a.m. I needed to pee. As I swung my legs off the bed, I heard it, a knock at the door, soft, polite. 3 quick raps. I froze. Who would be knocking at this hour? Housekeeping? Unlikely. Another guest? Possible, but why my room? I stayed silent, listening. After a full minute of quiet, I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Shrugging it off as a dream fragment bleeding into wakefulness, I used the bathroom down the hall and returned to my room, locking the deadbolt this time. I was drifting back to sleep when I heard it again. Knock, knock. 2 raps, deliberate, measured, exactly 2 seconds apart. My blood turned to ice. Don't answer if it knocks twice. I lay perfectly still in the dark, every muscle locked, my breath shallow and silent. The knocking didn't repeat. No doorknob rattled, no voice called out. Just silence, stretching taut and thin. After 10 minutes, I allowed myself to relax slightly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the old pipes groaning, maybe my own imagination conjuring horrors from exhaustion. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I noticed something I hadn't before. Above the bed, centered perfectly on the water-stained plaster, someone had scratched a series of symbols into the wall. Not graffiti. These were precise, almost ritualistic. A circle bisected by a vertical line, surrounded by 7 smaller dots arranged in a crescent shape. Beneath them, carved so deeply the plaster dust had collected in the grooves, were the numbers. 13. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I packed my bag quickly and headed downstairs to settle my bill. The lobby was empty, except for a young woman wiping down the front desk with a rag that looked dirtier than the surface it was cleaning. She smiled brightly when she saw me. "Checking out already? You barely slept." "Yeah, well, long drive ahead," I said, forcing a smile. "Listen, about room 13. Is there anything I should know? The clerk last night, He said something strange about knocking. Her smile faltered. She glanced toward the back office, then lowered her voice. Old man Hargrove, he's superstitious. Pays attention to things most folks don't. She leaned closer, her eyes darting nervously. Room 13's always been odd. Guests complain about noises, cold spots. One woman swore she saw a figure standing in the corner watching her sleep. But the real trouble started after Eleanor. Eleanor? She nodded, twisting the rag in her hands. Eleanor Voss. Stayed in room 13 back in '89. Never checked out. They found her 3 days later dead in the bed. Heart failure, they said. But she hesitated. But the coroner's report mentioned something weird. Her hands were clenched so tight around the bed sheets they had to pry her fingers loose. And her eyes, they said her eyes were fixed on the door like she'd seen something terrifying right before she died. A chill crawled up my spine. Did they ever figure out what she saw? The girl shook her head. No, but after that, guests started reporting knocks at the door, always 2 knocks, and if they answered. She trailed off, her face paling. 3 people disappeared from that room over the next decade, just vanished. Left all their stuff behind. Suitcases unzipped, wallets on the dresser. The police stopped investigating after a while. Said it was coincidence. But old man Hargrove, he knows. That's why he tells people not to answer if it knocks twice. I left the Blackwood Inn without looking back, the image of those carved symbols burning in my mind. I drove straight to the county records office in the nearest town, spending the afternoon digging through archived newspapers and death certificates. What I found chilled me deeper than any ghost story. Eleanor Voss hadn't just died of heart failure, she'd been running. From what? The records didn't say. She'd checked into the Blackwood Inn under a false name, paid cash for a week's stay, and kept to herself. The night she died, the only other guest in the hotel was a man registered as J. Smith, a name so common it was meaningless. He'd checked out the morning after Eleanor's body was discovered, leaving no forwarding address. But the real revelation came from a microfiche article buried in a 1990 issue of the local paper, a follow-up piece mentioning that Eleanor Voss had been a historian specializing in Appalachian folk magic. Her final research project, according to colleagues, involved protective sigils used to ward off entities that mimic human behavior to gain entry to homes. The symbols above my bed, the circle, the line, the 7 dots, matched descriptions from her unpublished notes. A ward, a desperate, last-minute attempt to protect herself. That night, safe in a chain motel 50 miles away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I double-checked the locks, pushed a chair under the doorknob, and slept with the lights on. But at 2:47 a.m., I woke to the sound of rain against a window and 2 soft knocks at the door. Knock. Knock. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking didn't repeat. But when I checked the peephole, the hallway was empty, except for a single waterlogged business card lying on the carpet. I didn't pick it up. I knew what it would say. Blackwood Inn. Vacancy. I moved cities after that. Changed my number. Avoided old hotels, especially ones with flickering neon signs. But sometimes, on rainy nights when the power flickers and the house settles into silence, I hear it again. 2 knocks, polite, patient, waiting. And I remember old man Hargrove's grip on my wrist, his breath smelling of peppermint and old blood, his pale eyes boring into mine as he whispered the warning that saved my life. Don't answer if it knocks twice, because whatever knocked on my door that night in room 13 wasn't human. It was something that learned from its mistakes, something that realized doors can be opened from the inside if you just convince the occupant to invite you in. And now wherever I go, it follows, not as a shadow or a specter, but as a possibility, a knock in the dark, a choice waiting to be made. I never answer, not once, not ever. But I wonder sometimes how long it will keep trying, how many doors it will knock on before it finds someone who doesn't know the rule, someone who, in their loneliness or curiosity or simple exhaustion, turns the knob and lets it in. And I wonder what it does to them after that. That's the end of this story. Now we move on. The voices through the baby monitor speak in my late grandmother's tongue. I never wanted children, not because I disliked them. I taught third grade for 12 years and adored my students, but because I understood the mathematics of love and loss too well. My mother died when I was 7. My father followed 3 years later in a car accident that left me in the custody of my maternal grandmother, Elara, a woman whose hands were permanently stained with henna and whose voice carried the musical cadence of a language I never learned to speak. She raised me in a small house on the edge of town, its walls lined with books in English she read voraciously. But her private moments, her prayers, her lullabies, her curses when she stubbed her toe, were always in that other tongue, the language of her childhood village in a mountainous region that no longer exists on modern maps, a place swallowed by political borders and time. She called it Kaelish. Linguists would have called it an isolate, a language with no known relatives spoken by fewer than 200 people when she left at 16. By the time she died last spring at 94, she was likely its last fluent speaker. I inherited her house, not out of sentimentality. I'd built a life 3 states away, but because no one else wanted it. My cousins had their own homes, their own clutter. The house stood empty for 6 months after her funeral while I sorted through a lifetime of accumulated objects. Ceramic bowls glazed in impossible blues, hand-woven rugs depicting constellations no astronomer would recognize, journals filled with looping script that might have been poetry or grocery lists for all I knew. I planned to sell it, list it with a realtor, accept the first reasonable offer, and never look back. But market was slow, and my savings were dwindling after a year of freelance work following my resignation from teaching. So I made a decision I immediately regretted. I would live in the house for 3 months, winterize it, make minor repairs, stage it properly, then sell it in the spring when buyers emerged from hibernation. I arrived on a Tuesday in late October with 2 suitcases and a determination to treat the place clinically, as a property, not a memory. The house smelled exactly as I remembered, beeswax and dried lavender and the faint, sweet decay of old paper. I spent the first day airing out rooms, wiping dust from surfaces, mentally cataloging what would stay and what would go to Goodwill. The second day, I tackled the attic, a cramped space accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway. It was there I found the baby monitor, not a modern digital device with encrypted signals and smartphone apps. This was old, late 1980s technology, all beige plastic and analog dials. A hand-me-down my grandmother must have received from some distant relative when my mother was an infant. I'd never seen it before. The receiver unit was tucked inside a cardboard box labeled linens in my grandmother's precise script, nestled between yellowed pillowcases embroidered with flowers I couldn't name. The transmitter, the part meant to sit in a nursery, was missing its cord, but otherwise intact. On impulse, I plugged the receiver into an outlet in the master bedroom, the one with the bay window overlooking the overgrown garden. The green power light glowed steadily. A habit, I thought. She kept it plugged in all these years out of habit, the way elderly people leave televisions on for company, even when they're not watching. That night, as I lay in my childhood bed, trying to ignore how the floorboards creaked in the same 3 places they always had, I heard it, faint at first, barely audible beneath the hum of the furnace kicking on, a voice, not English, not any language I recognized from decades of teaching children whose family spoke Spanish, Vietnamese, Arabic. This was something else, guttural yet melodic, consonants that clicked at the back of the throat, vowels that seemed to stretch and curl like smoke. Kalish. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The baby monitor's green light glowed steadily on the nightstand. I'd forgotten it was even plugged in. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, and turned the volume dial clockwise. The voice grew clearer, a woman's voice, aged, thin with years, but unmistakable. My grandmother's voice, speaking Kalish, not the gentle fragments I'd heard her murmur while kneading dough or tending her herb garden. This was urgent, insistent, a stream of words that tumbled over each other with rising intensity, punctuated by what sounded like weeping. I fumbled for my phone, opened a voice recording app, and held it close to the monitor's speaker. 93 seconds of my grandmother's voice speaking a language no living person should be able to understand. When the transmission ended abruptly, as if a plug had been yanked from a wall, I played back the recording. It was real, not a dream, not tinnitus, not the wind whistling through a crack in the window frame. I'd captured it. Proof. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my laptop open, searching for any documentation of Kalish, academic papers, linguistic surveys, even obscure forum posts from language enthusiasts. I found almost nothing. A single footnote in a 1972 anthropology text referencing an undocumented isolate spoken in the Northern Highlands, reportedly extinct by mid-century. A grainy photograph in a digital archive of a village elder identified only as Woman of Kyle. Her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her hands resting on a spindle. No audio recordings existed, no dictionaries, no grammars. My grandmother had taken the language to her grave, or so I'd believed. The next morning, I decided to investigate the source. The transmitter had to be somewhere in the house, plugged in, somehow still functional after 30-plus years, picking up what? The attic yielded nothing beyond the receiver unit I'd already found. I checked every closet, every cupboard, every storage space. Nothing. Frustrated, I descended to the basement, a damp, low-ceiling space my grandmother had used for canning and storage, its concrete floor cracked in places where tree roots had pressed upward from below. The air was thick with the smell of earth and mildew, and there, On a shelf beside dusty jars of preserved plums sat the transmitter unit. Its cord snaked into a wall outlet that shouldn't have existed. The basement had been unfinished when I was a child, with exposed wiring and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Yet here was a modern three-prong outlet, freshly installed, the drywall around it still pale and unmarked by time. I unplugged the transmitter. The receiver upstairs fell silent. I plugged it back in. Within minutes, the voice returned. Softer this time, almost conversational. I carried the receiver downstairs and stood in the basement, holding it inches from the transmitter. The voice wasn't coming through the device. It was coming from the walls themselves, from the earth beneath the foundation, a vibration that the analog electronics were somehow translating into sound. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office. I needed to know who had been in this house since my grandmother's death. The property hadn't been listed for sale. Utilities had been maintained under her name, paid automatically from her estate account. But someone had installed that outlet. Someone had been here. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Martha, pulled the property file without hesitation. "Elara Vancourt," she said, running a finger down a log sheet. "Such a sweet lady. Came in every December to pay her property taxes in cash. Always brought me a sprig of rosemary from her garden." She looked up at me. "You her granddaughter?" I nodded. Martha's expression softened with sympathy. "I was so sorry to hear. She was special." She turned the file toward me. "No work permits filed for this property in the last 10 years. No contractors. No inspections." She paused, her finger stopping on an entry from 3 months ago. "But there was a welfare check. End of August. Neighbor reported lights on at odd hours. Movement in the garden at night. Officer Daniels responded." My blood ran cold. August. 2 months after my grandmother's funeral. 2 months after I'd locked the house and left the key with the lawyer. "Can I speak to Officer Daniels?" I asked, my voice tight. Martha made a call. 10 minutes later, a broad-shouldered man in uniform arrived, his face weathered and calm. I explained my situation. The house left vacant. The inexplicable outlet. The welfare check. Officer Daniels listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "I remember that call. Mrs. Gable next door, she's 82, mind sharper than mine, said she saw lights in the basement window around 2 a.m. Said she heard singing, not loud, just humming, she thought." He met my eyes. "I checked the place thoroughly. Doors locked, windows secure, no signs of forced entry, but the basement light was on, and the back door to the garden was unlocked." "Was anyone here?" I asked, my throat dry. He hesitated. "No, but there were footprints, small, barefoot, leading from the basement door to the old apple tree at the back of the property, and," he looked uncomfortable, "and the soil beneath that tree had been disturbed, freshly turned, like someone had been digging." I drove back to the house in a daze. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. I went straight to the backyard, to the gnarled apple tree my grandmother had planted from a seed when she first moved here in 1952. Its branches were bare now, skeletal against the violet sky, and there, at its base, the earth was indeed disturbed. Not recently, but within the last few months. The soil had settled, grass beginning to reclaim the patch, but the outline of a shallow depression remained visible. I fetched a trowel from the garden shed and began to dig. Not deep. 6 inches down, my tool struck something solid. Not rock, wood. I cleared the soil carefully, revealing the corner of a small box. Cedar, by the smell, carved with the same floral patterns I'd seen on my grandmother's jewelry boxes. My hand shook as I pried it from the earth. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of papers, not her journals. These were older, brittle, foxed with age, covered in the same looping script I'd seen upstairs, and beneath them a single photograph. A young woman with my grandmother's eyes standing beside a man whose face had been carefully scratched away with a blade. They stood before a stone house with a thatched roof, mountains rising behind them like broken teeth. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, Keyhole, 1938. Before the silence. Asterisk. Beneath the photograph lay a leather-bound book smaller than my palm. Its cover was unmarked, but when I opened it, I understood. Not a dictionary, not a grammar, a primer. First words in Kalish, handwritten in meticulous script. My grandmother's script. She'd been creating it for years, teaching herself to write the language she'd only ever spoken. Page after page of vocabulary lists, conjugation tables, simple sentences. The sun rises, the child sleeps. I remember you. And on the final page, a single paragraph in English dated April 12th, 2022, 3 weeks before her death. If you are reading this, my love, you have found what I buried. Do not be afraid of the voices. They are not ghosts. They are echoes. When our village fell silent, when the soldiers came and took the men, when the women and children walked for weeks to reach the border, when we were told never to speak our tongue again lest we be marked, I made a promise. I would carry the language inside me until my last breath. But a language cannot live in one throat alone. It needs listeners. It needs children to learn its songs. I have no children of my blood left to teach, but the house has learned. These walls have heard me pray for 70 years. These floorboards have felt my feet dance to songs no one else remembers. The house has become a vessel, and when I am gone, it will speak what I can no longer say, not to haunt you, to remember, to bear witness. When you hear the voices, know this: you are not alone. You are being welcomed home in the only language this house knows how to speak. I sat beneath the apple tree until full dark, the book cradled in my lap, tears tracing paths through the dirt on my cheeks. I'd spent my life running from this place, from the weight of a grief I'd inherited too young, from the silence that followed my parents' deaths, from the foreign cadence of a grandmother's private moments that marked me as different from other children. I'd built a life of clean surfaces and rational explanations. And now the house was speaking to me in a tongue I couldn't understand, offering a connection I'd spent decades refusing. That night, I didn't unplug the baby monitor. I carried it downstairs and placed the receiver on the kitchen table, the transmitter still plugged into the basement outlet. At 2:17 a.m., the hour my grandmother had always said was when the veil between worlds grew thin, the voice returned. But this time it was different, slower, deliberate, as if speaking not to the empty air but directly to me. I recorded it. The next morning, I drove to the State University and found Dr. Eris Thorne, a linguist specializing in language preservation who'd once given a guest lecture at my school. I played him the recording without explanation. He listened, his face growing progressively more pale. When it ended, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. This shouldn't exist," he whispered. "The phonemes, the glottal stops. I've only seen descriptions of these sounds in fragmented missionary accounts from the 1920s. He looked at me, his professional composure shattered. "Where did you get this?" I told him everything: the house, the monitor, the box beneath the apple tree. I showed him the primer. He handled it with reverence, his fingers trembling as he turned the pages. "This is miraculous," he breathed. "A complete documentation of a language we believed lost forever. Do you understand what this is? This isn't just words. It's a world view, a way of seeing time, family, the natural world that died with its last speakers." He looked up, his eyes glistening. "Your grandmother didn't just preserve a language. She built an ark." I began to learn. Every evening after work, I'd taken a temporary teaching position at the local elementary school. I sat with the primer and the recordings, painstakingly transcribing sounds, matching them to my grandmother's English translations. Dr. Thorne visited weekly, bringing equipment to make higher quality recordings of the monitor's transmissions. Together, we built a lexicon, a grammar. We discovered the language had no word for goodbye, only until the path crosses again. No word for ghost, only the one who remains to witness. The voices grew more complex as my understanding deepened. They began to form narratives, not complete stories, but fragments that wove together over weeks. A description of harvesting mountain herbs at dawn, the taste of bread baked in a stone oven, the sound of a river that no longer exists on any map. And always, woven through these memories, a refrain I eventually translated as the child who listens. One rainy November night, as I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, the voice came through the monitor with unusual clarity. Not my grandmother's voice this time, a child's voice, high, clear, speaking Gaelic with perfect fluency. It recited a counting rhyme I'd transcribed weeks earlier. 1 stone, 2 stones, 3 stones for the path home, then fell silent. After a long pause, my grandmother's voice returned, speaking a single sentence I understood immediately, though I'd never heard these words before. "She is learning." I froze. The child in the rhyme wasn't metaphorical. The house wasn't just echoing memories, it was teaching. Passing the language to what? To whom? The answer came 3 nights later. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, the monitor resting on the coffee table beside me. I woke to the sensation of small, cool fingers brushing against my cheek. I opened my eyes. A little girl stood beside the couch, 7 or 8 years old, dressed in a simple wool dress the color of dried earth, her dark hair braided with sprigs of lavender. She wasn't transparent. She wasn't glowing. She was simply there, solid, real. And she was speaking, not loudly but softly, directly into my ear, the words I'd been struggling to pronounce for weeks, correcting my accent, guiding my tongue to form sounds my mouth had never made. "Like this," she whispered in Gaelic, "the breath comes from here." She placed her small hand on my chest, over my heart. Her touch was cool, but not unpleasant, a mountain stream on a summer day. I didn't scream, I didn't pull away, I simply lay there, tears streaming down my face as this child, whoever or whatever she was, taught me to say "I remember you" in a language that had been silent for generations. When she finished, she smiled, a fleeting, sad expression, and pointed toward the basement. Then she faded, not vanishing abruptly, but dissolving like mist under morning sun until only the scent of lavender remained. I went downstairs immediately. The transmitter still glowed with its steady green light. But something had changed in the basement. The air felt different, lighter, charged with an energy that raised the hairs on my arms. And on the dirt floor beneath the workbench, where no footprints had been before, were two sets of impressions. My own shoes from earlier that day, and beside them, small bare footprints leading toward the foundation wall. I followed them. The footprint stopped at a section of concrete that looked no different from any other, gray, cracked, stained with decades of moisture. But when I knelt and ran my fingers over the surface, I felt it, a hairline fracture forming letters. Not English letters, Kalish script, carved not into the concrete, but emerging from within it, as if the house itself were writing its own story. I spent the next month documenting everything. Dr. Thorne brought ground-penetrating radar. The results were inconclusive. The foundation showed no anomalies, no hidden chambers, no explanation for the voices or the writing. But I knew the truth. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was alive with memory. My grandmother's lifetime of solitude, her refusal to let her language die, even when she had no one to speak it to, had seeped into the very structure of this place. The floorboards had absorbed her footsteps. The walls had memorized her prayers. The foundation had drunk the tears she shed for a homeland she'd never see again. And in her absence, the house had begun to speak, to practice the language it had learned through decades of silent witness. The child, I came to understand, she wasn't a ghost either. She was a construct, a manifestation of the language itself, the voice of the next generation that never was, given form by a house determined not to let its knowledge die. She appeared only to me because I was listening, because I was trying to learn, because I was, in my own hesitant way, becoming the listener the language needed to survive. Winter deepened. Snow blanketed the garden, silencing the world beyond the windows. And every night at 2:17 a.m., I sat with the baby monitor and listened. Sometimes the voices were my grandmother's, sometimes the child's, sometimes others, men's voices, women's voices, a chorus of a village that existed only in memory and mortar. They spoke of births and deaths, of harvests and hunger, of songs sung beneath stars that shone differently over those lost mountains. They spoke of love, of loss, of the terrible, beautiful burden of being the last one to remember. One night in late January, the transmission was different. A single voice, my grandmother's, speaking slowly, deliberately, as if dictating a letter. Dr. Thorne and I transcribed it together, our hands trembling as we matched sounds to script. When we finished, we had a complete narrative, not a fragment, a story, her story. In the year of the red snow, when I was 16 winters old, the soldiers came to Keyhole. They did not burn our houses or kill our people. They did something worse. They forbade our tongue. To speak Kalish was to be taken away. To teach it to a child was to invite disappearance. So we grew silent. We learned their language. We nodded when they spoke. We buried our words deep inside where no one could hear them. But a language cannot live in silence. It needs breath. It needs ears. So I made a promise to the stones of my home as I packed my single bag. I will carry you inside me. I will speak you in the dark when no one can hear. I will hum your songs to my children even if they do not understand. And when my time comes to leave this world, I will give you to the walls that sheltered me, to the floor that held my feet, to the roof that kept the rain from my head. I will teach this new house to speak what my throat can no longer say, and it will wait. It will wait for the child who listens. It will wait for the one who comes home. Asterisk. The transmission ended. The monitor fell silent. Not the abrupt silence of a device being unplugged, but a natural conclusion, the end of a story finally told. The next morning, I made a decision. I called a realtor and withdrew the house from the market. I wasn't leaving. This wasn't just property anymore. It was an archive, a living library, a vessel carrying the last breath of a language that refused to die. I still teach elementary school 3 days a week. The other 4 days, I work with Dr. Thorne to document everything the house gives us. We've published preliminary findings in a linguistics journal, anonymous, attributed only to a private residence in the northeastern United States. Scholars have written to us with questions. Skeptics have demanded proof. We give them recordings, transcriptions. The primer my grandmother created, we cannot explain the phenomenon. We can only bear witness to it. The child still visits sometimes, not every night, only when I've mastered a particularly difficult grammatical concept or when I speak a full sentence without error. She appears at the edge of my vision, a flicker of movement in a sunlit room, the impression of small feet on a dusty floorboard, the scent of lavender on still air. She never speaks English. She doesn't need to. We communicate in Kalish now, haltingly on my part, patiently on hers. She is my teacher, my grandmother's final gift. Last week, as I sat in the garden beneath the apple tree, now budding with the first green promises of spring, I realized something. The voices through the baby monitor haven't spoken in 3 days. Not a single word. At first, panic seized me. Had I done something wrong? Had the house grown silent again, this time forever? But then I understood. I no longer needed the monitor. I was learning to hear the house directly, the whisper of Kalish in the creak of a floorboard, the murmur of a forgotten song in the sigh of wind through the eaves, the echo of a lullaby in the patter of rain against the window pane. The language isn't trapped in this house. It's woven into it. And now, slowly, painstakingly, it's weaving itself into me. I dream in Kalish sometimes. I wake with words on my tongue I never learned consciously. Yesterday, a student asked me how to say I miss you in another language. Without thinking, I answered in Kalish. The words came effortlessly, naturally, as if they'd been waiting all my life to be spoken. The house is quiet tonight. The baby monitor sits unplugged on the shelf where I found it. I don't need it anymore. I sit at the kitchen table with my grandmother's primer open before me, and I speak aloud, a simple sentence I practiced for weeks. I am here. I am listening. I will remember. From the corner of the room, a floorboard creaks in response, not randomly, but in a pattern I now recognize as affirmation. And for the first time since I was 7 years old, since my mother died and the world grew silent and sharp-edged, I do not feel alone. I am surrounded by voices, by memory, by love that refused to be silenced, even by death. The voices through the baby monitor spoke in my late grandmother's tongue, but they weren't speaking to frighten me. They were speaking to welcome me home, to the language she carried across an ocean, through war and loss and decades of solitude, just so one day her granddaughter might finally learn how to listen. And so, this story comes to an end. Let's start another. I downloaded an app to record my sleep talking. It recorded a conversation between me and someone under my bed. I am a rational man. I work in logistics. I deal with spreadsheets, shipping containers, and hard data. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in demons. And I certainly didn't believe that my one-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a secure complex was anything other than a box of drywall and IKEA furniture. I started using the app, SleepSpeak, about 3 weeks ago. My girlfriend, Emily, had stayed over a few times and complained that I was mumbling in my sleep. She said it was creepy, that I sounded like I was arguing with someone. She broke up with me for unrelated reasons, or so she said, but the comment stuck. I wanted to know what I was saying. Was it stress? Suppressed anger? Apnea? The app is simple. It runs in the background. It uses a noise gate to ignore silence and the hum of the air conditioner, only recording when it detects distinct vocal frequencies. In the morning, it gives you a list of events with timestamps. Night 1 to 3 were uneventful. A few recordings of me snoring. One recording of me groaning and shifting the duvet. I felt silly for even using it. Night 4 was when it started. I woke up on Tuesday morning feeling drained, like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. I grabbed my phone and saw the notification. 4 new events detected. I clicked the first one. 2:03 a.m. Me, muffled. No, the red one. Just nonsense, dream gibberish. I clicked the second one. 3:15 a.m. Me, put it back. Still normal. I clicked the third one. 3:45 a.m. The waveform on the screen was different. Usually my voice showed up as a jagged blue block of sound. This recording had that, but intertwined with it was a second, much thinner, sharper red spike. I pressed play. Me, groggy. It's too tight. Silence for 3 seconds. Voice B, it has to be tight, or it won't fit. I dropped the phone on my duvet. My heart did a somersault in my chest. I sat there in the morning light, staring at the screen. The voice, it wasn't Emily. It wasn't a neighbor shouting through the wall. It was a whisper, a dry, rasping whisper. And the audio fidelity was terrifying. It sounded like the source was inches from the microphone. My phone charged on my nightstand right next to my head. I played it again. It has to be tight or it won't fit. The voice sounded genderless. It sounded like dead leaves skittering on pavement. I searched the apartment immediately. I checked the closets, the shower, the utility cupboard. Nothing. The windows were locked. The front door was dead bolted. I live alone. I told myself it was interference. Maybe the app picked up a radio frequency, a crossed line. I deleted the app. I went to work. But by the time I got home, the curiosity was eating me alive. I'm a data guy. Anomalies bother me. If it was interference, I could prove it. I re-downloaded the app. I also bought a standalone digital voice recorder, a high-end Sony model I used for meetings. I placed the phone on the nightstand and the Sony recorder on the floor, sliding it halfway under the bed. My bed is a heavy wooden frame that sits about 6 inches off the ground. Just enough space for dust bunnies and lost socks. Night 5. I didn't sleep well. I lay there listening to the settling of the building. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I woke up and went straight to the devices. The app showed 12 new events. The Sony recorder showed continuous audio, but marked spikes in decibels. I synced them up on my laptop. Event 1, 1:15 a.m. Me. Where are you going? Voice BR from under the bed. Just checking the seams. Go back to sleep, Caleb. I stopped the playback. I felt like I was going to throw up. It knew my name. The audio from the Sony recorder, the one on the floor, was clearer. The voice wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from above the recorder. It was coming from the underside of the mattress. I listened to the rest. It was a conversation, a long, mundane, terrifying conversation. 2:30 a.m. Me. Is it morning? Voice B. Not yet. 2 more hours. You need to rest the vessel. Me. Okay. 3:45 a.m. Me. It itches. Voice B. I know. The stretching is the hardest part. I'll apply more salve. Sound. A wet, slapping sound. Like raw meat being dropped on a counter. Slap. Slap. I stood up and backed away from the bed. I looked at the mattress. It was a standard memory foam mattress I'd bought online a year ago. I grabbed a pocket knife from my dresser. I stripped the sheets off. I flipped the mattress over. The underside was pristine. White fabric, no tears, no holes, no stains. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I pranking myself? Was I doing a ventriloquist act in my sleep? I decided to stay awake. Night 6. I drank 3 Red Bulls. I set up a camera on a tripod in the corner of the room, pointing at the bed. I sat in my gaming chair with the lights on, determined to catch this thing. 3 a.m. passed. 4 a.m. passed. Nothing happened. The room was silent. At 5 a.m., my eyes were burning. I blinked, just a long, slow blink. When I opened them, sunlight was streaming through the blinds. I panicked. I looked at the clock. 9:30 a.m. I had fallen asleep in the chair. I rushed to the camera. It was off. The battery was dead. That was impossible. I had plugged it into the wall AC adapter. I checked the outlet. The plug had been pulled. I checked the Sleep Speak app on my phone, which was still on the nightstand. 1 new event. Time, 5:02 a.m. 2 minutes after I closed my eyes. I pressed play. Voice B. He is trying to see us. Me. Voice sounded different, flatter. He is scared. Voice B. He should be. We are not ready for the transfer. The skin is still too tight around the shoulders. Me. I will eat more. Expand the surface area. Voice B. Good. Now, delete the video. I heard the sound of footsteps on the recording. My footsteps. And that is the end of this story. Now let's begin a new one. The dead frequency of station K109. I am writing this on a typewriter because I can no longer trust anything with a screen. If you see a digital clock flicker, if your phone buzzes but no one is calling, if the radio in your car turns on by itself, run. Do not investigate. Do not try to tune it in. Just run until you find silence. My name is Elias. I was a radio enthusiast, a ham operator, the kind of guy who spent his weekends building antennas in his backyard and listening to static from across the ocean. I love the noise. I love the idea that the air around us is filled with invisible voices just waiting to be caught. I found the job on a forum for vintage electronics. A user named Signal Master posted a request for a caretaker for an old AM radio station in the Mojave Desert. Station K109, night shift engineer, maintain transmitter, log signal strength, 3,000 month, cache, isolation required. It was perfect for me. I needed the money and I wanted to get away from the city, from the noise of modern life. I drove out to the coordinates. It was miles from civilization, a small concrete building. at the base of a massive, rusted radio tower that stretched hundreds of feet into the desert sky. The tower hummed. You could feel it in your teeth when you got close. The previous engineer was waiting for me. He was a thin, twitchy man named Ornate. He had dark circles under his eyes and chewed his fingernails until they bled. "It's automated," Ornate said, shoving a ring of keys into my hand. "The playlist is on a loop. Old jazz, big band, stuff nobody listens to. Your job is to keep the transmitter cool. Check the gauges. If the needle goes into the red, flip the breaker. That's it." "Why do you need a person here if it's automated?" I asked. Ornate looked at the tower. "Because sometimes it drifts. The signal drifts. You have to bring it back." "Drifts to where?" He didn't answer. He got in his truck and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. I settled in. The station was a time capsule. Reel-to-reel tape decks, vacuum tube amplifiers, a smell of ozone and old dust. The only modern thing was a small mini-fridge in the corner. The first week was peaceful. I sat in the control booth, watching the VU meters bounce to the rhythm of Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman. I read books. I drank coffee. I watched the sun set over the dunes. But on the 8th night, the drift started. It was 2 a.m. The station was playing a slow, mournful trumpet solo. Suddenly, the music warped. It slowed down, the pitch dropping until it sounded like a dying cow. Woo! Then static, white noise that sounded like screaming. I looked at the frequency dial. It had moved. We were supposed to be at 1090 a.m. The needle was drifting down 1080, 1070, 1060. I grabbed the manual tuning knob. It was hot to the touch. I tried to turn it back, but it fought me. It felt like someone was holding it from the other side. "Come on," I grunted, twisting hard. The static cleared, but it wasn't jazz. A voice cut through the speakers, a voice that sounded wet, gargled, like someone speaking with a throat full of water. "Is anyone listening?" I froze. This was a broadcast frequency. It shouldn't be picking up two-way traffic. I grabbed the microphone. "This is station K109. You are interrupting a broadcast. Identify yourself." Silence. Then a laugh, a dry, crackling laugh. "Elias, you have pretty eyes." I dropped the mic. It hit the desk with a thud. How did they know my name? I hadn't told anyone I was here except the forum user, and I used a pseudonym online. I wrestled the tuning knob back to 1090. The jazz returned upbeat and cheerful, mocking my fear. I checked the transmitter logs. There was no record of the interruption. According to the machine, the jazz had been playing the whole time. I told myself it was interference. A trucker with a powerful CB radio messing with me. The next night, it got worse. I was doing my rounds, checking the massive cooling fans in the transmitter room. The hum of the tower was louder tonight. It felt heavy, pressing on my chest. As I walked past the main capacitor bank, I heard tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the metal casing of the transmitter. I stopped. "Hello?" Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, intelligent. I put my ear against the warm metal. "Let us out," a chorus of whispers said. It sounded like hundreds of people whispering in unison. "It burns! The wire burns!" I jumped back. Then the lights in the room flickered and died. The only light came from the glowing orange vacuum tubes inside the transmitter. In that dim orange light, I saw shadows moving, not on the walls, inside the tubes. The vacuum tubes were glass cylinders the size of milk jugs. Inside, filaments glowed to amplify the signal. But inside tube 4, something was crawling. A black, shadowy shape, pressing its hands against the glass from the inside. It had a face of pure anguish, mouth open in a silent scream. I ran back to the control booth and locked the door. I grabbed the station phone to call the owner. "Signal, master." The line was dead. No dial tone, just the sound of wind. Then the wind stopped, and a voice spoke. "Don't leave, Elias. The broadcast is just starting." I slammed the phone down. I sat in the chair, staring at the glass window that looked out into the desert. It was pitch black outside. Then the on-air light turned on. I hadn't touched the console. The music stopped. A voice came over the studio monitors. It was my voice. "Welcome back to the midnight hour," the voice said. "Tonight, we have a special request for Elias, a song from the other side." Then a sound began to play. It wasn't music. It was the sound of digging. Shovels hitting dirt, crunch, scrape. Then the sound of wood splintering. A coffin lid breaking. Then heavy breathing. I covered my ears. "Stop it! Stop it!" I reached for the master brake to kill the power. My hand stopped inches from the switch. Pain, white-hot pain, shot through my arm. I looked down. My veins. The veins in my arm were glowing orange, like the vacuum tubes. I could feel the electricity surging through me. I was becoming part of the circuit. "Do not cut the signal," my own voice said through the speakers. "We need the carrier wave. We need to travel." I fell to the floor, convulsing. The pain was unbearable. I could feel voices in my head, memories that weren't mine. I remembered dying in a fire. I remembered drowning in a lake. I remembered being buried alive. They were the voices of the dead, and they were using the radio tower as a bridge. I blacked out. I woke up the next morning on the floor. The sun was shining. The jazz was playing. My arm was burned, a Lichtenberg figure scar tracing down my skin like a lightning strike. I packed my bag. I was leaving. I didn't care about the money. I walked to my car. It wouldn't start. The battery was dead, completely drained. I checked my phone. Dead. I was stranded. I walked back to the station. I had to fix the car or find a radio to call for help. I went to the workshop in the back. I found a spare battery. As I was carrying it to the car, I looked up at the tower. There was something climbing it. A man. He was halfway up, clinging to the metal struts. "Hey!" I yelled. "Get down! It's dangerous!" He stopped. He turned his head 180 degrees like an owl. It was ornate, the previous engineer, but his eyes were gone, burned out sockets, and his mouth was sewn shut with copper wire. He let go of the tower. He fell hundreds of feet. I watched him hit the ground. Thud. I ran over to him. His body shattered on impact, but there was no blood. He was hollow. His skin was just a shell. Inside, he was filled with old radio parts. Transistors, wires, capacitors. He was a machine made of meat and junk. And he was still moving. His broken hand reached up and grabbed my ankle. A voice came from his chest, sounding like a broken speaker. "You are the new component. You must maintain the signal." I kicked him off and ran. I ran into the desert. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran away from the tower. I walked for hours. The sun beat down on me. I was dehydrated, delirious. I saw a house in the distance, a small shack. I ran to it. "Help, please!" I burst through the door. It was the control room. I was back at the station. I had walked in a circle. No, I had walked straight. The space around the tower was warped. It was a loop. I collapsed in the chair. The sun went down. The on-air light turned on. "Welcome back, Elias," the voice said. "Tonight, we are going to open the channel wide." The frequency dial began to spin on its own. Fast. A blur. The hum of the tower grew to a deafening roar. The glass of the control booth window shattered. Outside, in the desert, the sand began to vibrate. Shadows rose from the dunes. Thousands of them. The ghosts of the airwaves. They floated toward the station. I knew what they wanted. They wanted a body. They wanted my body. I looked at the console. I couldn't turn it off. They controlled the power. But I saw the microphone cable. It was an XLR cable, thick and shielded. If I couldn't stop the signal, I had to stop the receiver. I grabbed the cable. I wrapped it around the main output transformer. I grounded the positive lead to the negative. A short circuit. I pulled tight. Boom! The console exploded. Sparks showered the room. Fire erupted from the tape decks. The screaming from the speakers turned into a high-pitched shriek of agony. "No!" The tower outside groaned. Metal twisted. I ran out the back door as the building caught fire. The tower was glowing red hot. The metal was melting. It collapsed. It fell in slow motion, crashing into the dunes with the force of a meteor. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I walked again. This time, the loop was broken. I found a highway by morning. I hitched a ride to the nearest town. I thought I was free, but I am not. I am writing this in a library. The person next to me is listening to music on headphones. I can hear it. Not the music. I can hear the static underneath the music. And in the static, I hear my name, Elias. We are still broadcasting. And my arm, the scar on my arm, is glowing, faintly, orange. I am a receiver now. I can't be around people. If I touch someone, they hear it too. They start to scream. They start to remember deaths they haven't died yet. I am going to the mountains, to a cave, somewhere deep underground where radio waves can't reach. If you hear a song on the radio that slows down, if you hear a voice that sounds like wet gravel, change the station, change it fast, before it changes you. This story ends here. It's time to move on to the next. The portrait in the attic changes its expression every night. The inheritance came with keys and caveats. My great-aunt Eleanor's lawyer handed me the deed to Willowwood House, a sprawling shingled Victorian on the edge of a dying New England town, with a handshake that lingered a second too long. "She left it to you specifically," he said, his voice dry as attic dust. "Said you were the only one who'd understand its moods." He wouldn't elaborate, just slid a rusted key across his desk. "The attic door sticks. Use the spare key for it. And whatever you do, don't disturb the portrait on the east wall. It's not yours to touch." When I asked why, he simply adjusted his glasses, the lenses flashing opaque. "Some doors," he murmured, "are best left closed." Willowwood smelled of beeswax and buried time. Sunlight strained through grimy leaded windows, illuminating dust motes dancing above threadbare Persian rugs and velvet drapes heavy with mildew. The air hung still and cold even in late September, carrying the faint, sweet decay of dried roses and old paper. Eleanor had lived alone for 40 years after my grandfather's death, and the silence had seeped into the floorboards, the wainscoting, the very marrow of the house. I moved in on a Tuesday, hauling boxes of my meager belongings up the creaking front stairs. The realtor had mentioned the attic was full of character. What she didn't mention was the door. It was at the end of the second-floor hallway, taller than the others, made of dark, unvarnished oak. No knob, just a tarnished iron latch. The key the lawyer gave me fit stiffly. When I turned it, the lock released with a groan like a stone grinding over bone. The door swung inward slowly, revealing steep, narrow stairs vanishing into gloom. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying the sharp, acrid scent of oil paint and turpentine, utterly alien in the dust-thick stillness of the rest of the house. I flicked on the bare bulb dangling from the rafters. Weak light spilled over stacks of steamer trunks, draped sheet-covered furniture, and mountains of yellowed newspapers. And there, on the east wall, covered by a heavy canvas drop-cloth, was the portrait. I didn't touch it, not that first day. I just stood at the top of the stairs, the cold seeping through my sweater, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty silence. It was watchful. That night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of scratching, not mice, deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging slowly down wood. It came from above, from the attic. I lay frozen, listening until dawn painted the ceiling pale gray. The scratching stopped exactly as the first light touched the window. The next afternoon, curiosity overpowered caution. I climbed the attic stairs, the cold deepening with each step. I stood before the draped portrait, heart pounding. It's just a painting, I told myself. Aunt Eleanor's odd taste. I gripped the edge of the canvas. Cloth. It felt unnaturally heavy, damp with cold. I yanked it down. The frame was ornate, tarnished silver. The painting itself was arresting. A woman in a high-collared Edwardian gown, seated in a carved wooden chair. Late 20s, maybe. Dark hair pulled severely back, eyes wide-set, intelligent, but holding a sadness that seemed to bleed through the varnish. Her lips were pressed in a neutral line. The background was a blurred landscape of willow trees weeping into a twilight lake. The artist's signature was smudged in the corner. A. Thorne, 1898 Os. I studied it for 10 minutes, noting the meticulous brushstrokes, the lifelike sheen on the woman's skin. Nothing unusual, just an old portrait. I recovered it with the drop cloth. The smell of turpentine sharpened my nostrils, and went downstairs. I woke the next night to the scratching again, but this time, beneath it, a sound that stopped my breath. A low, muffled sob. Not human, not animal. A vibration in the air, itself, like wood weeping. I didn't go upstairs. I locked my bedroom door and pressed my ear to the floorboards until dawn. In the morning, I climbed back to the attic. The drop cloth lay crumpled on the floor. The portrait was uncovered. I stared. The woman's expression had changed. Her lips were no longer neutral. They curved upward at the corners, a faint, almost imperceptible smile, but her eyes, they were wider, brighter, and filled with a quiet, unnerving hunger. I backed down the stairs, cold sweat on my neck. Impossible. Must have knocked the cloth off last time. Trick of the light. But the turpentine smell was stronger now, clinging to my clothes. The changes escalated. Night after night, I'd find the drop cloth discarded, the portrait uncovered, its expression shifting with the moon. Tuesday, tears like liquid pearls tracing paths down her cheeks, her mouth open in a silent wail. Wednesday, eyes narrowed in suspicion, head tilted as if listening. Thursday, a full, radiant smile that didn't touch her cold, black pupils. Friday, lips drawn back in a snarl, revealing just the hint of sharp, yellowed teeth. Each time, the turpentine scent grew thicker, sharper, until it coated my tongue. Each time, the cold in the attic deepened, frosting the dust on the trunks. I tried recovering it. I pinned the drop cloth down with thumbtacks. I wedged a chair under the attic door handle. Nothing worked. Every morning, the cloth was on the floor. The chair was back in the corner. The portrait was uncovered. Watching, waiting, I researched. The town library's local history section held a brittle newspaper clipping from October 3rd, 1898. Local artist Alastair Thorne commits suicide after wife's mysterious disappearance. The article was brief. Thorne, a respected portraitist, had reported his wife, Clara, missing after she failed to return from a walk along Willowwood Lake. Weeks later, Thorne was found in his studio, wrists slit, surrounded by half-finished portraits of Clara, all showing her with expressions of terror. The police suspected foul play but found no body. The case went cold. The house, Willowwood, was sold. Clara Thorne. The name echoed in the silent house. I stared at the portrait's latest change. Last night, her hand had lifted from her lap. One pale finger pointed directly at the attic stairs. That night, the scratching stopped. Instead, I heard singing. A woman's voice, clear and sweet as a bell, drifting down the hallway. It was an old lullaby my mother used to sing. "Hush now, baby. Don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." But the words were twisted, slowed, the melody souring into something mournful and wrong. I pressed my palms over my ears, but the voice wasn't outside. It was inside my head. Cold seeped under my bedroom door, pooling around my feet like water. The singing grew louder, closer. Then, abruptly, silence. I found the message at dawn, scrawled in what looked like dried mud on my bathroom mirror. "Let me out." She didn't jump. Panic became my constant companion. I stopped sleeping. I taped the attic door shut. I bought sage and burned it until my eyes watered, chanting prayers I didn't believe in. The house absorbed it all. The cold spots multiplied. Drawers opened by themselves. The lullaby hummed in the walls. And every morning the attic door was unlocked, the tape torn cleanly aside, the portrait uncovered, Clara's expression now one of desperate pleading, tears streaking the dusty varnish. Her pointing finger wasn't aimed at the stairs anymore. It pointed straight at me. I called the lawyer. He refused to speak of Clara Thorne. "Burn the portrait," he hissed down the phone, his voice tight with fear. "Burn it and scatter the ashes in the lake. Don't look back." When I asked why he hadn't done it himself, he went silent for a long moment. "I tried," he whispered, 20 years ago. The fire wouldn't take. The frame turned black, but the canvas, it stayed clean. And after the knocking started in my walls. I moved 3 times. It always finds me. I gave you the house to save myself. Forgive me." He hung up. That night, the power died. Not just in the house, in the whole street. Moonlight bled through my window, painting the room in shades of bone. The singing started again, louder now, coming from the hallway, not the lullaby. A new song, a dirge. Heavy footsteps climbed the stairs, slow, deliberate, too heavy for a woman. Thud, 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 stopping outside my door. The knob rattled, not violently, patiently, testing. I backed into the corner, clutching a fireplace poker, tears freezing on my cheeks. The cold radiating from under the door was arctic. The singing shifted, Clara's voice now layered with another A man's voice, guttural, furious. "Mine," it growled beneath her melody. "Always mine. The lake took one, but the house keeps the other. Come out, little bird. Let Papa see you." The door handle turned. The lock held, for now. But the wood around it began to splinter. Fine cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. Moonlight caught the edge of a shadow beneath the door, a man's boot, polished and black, resting on the threshold. The singing swelled. Clara's voice now a scream inside my skull. "He didn't let me jump. He pushed. He painted me while I screamed." I ran, not to the front door. The shadow was there too, tall and broad-shouldered, blocking the exit. I ran up to the attic. It was the only door not yet breached. I threw the latch open, stumbling up the icy stairs, slamming the door behind me. I jammed the spare key into the lock, twisting it hard. Below, the splintering stopped. The singing ceased. An unnatural silence fell. I stood in the attic's freezing dark, breathing hard. Moonlight streamed through the dormer window, illuminating the uncovered portrait. Clara's face was transformed. No sorrow, no fear, pure, radiant fury. Her eyes blazed like coals. Her mouth was open in a silent roar, and her hand wasn't pointing anymore. Both arms were outstretched, palms upturned, as if pushing against an invisible barrier. The turpentine smell was suffocating. Paint fumes stung my eyes. Then I saw it. Behind her, in the painted willow trees, the background had changed. No longer a lake, a dark, churning hole in the earth, ringed with grasping skeletal hands, and standing at its edge, half fused with the shadows, was a man in a painter's smock. Alistair Thorne. His face was a rictus of rage, one hand gripping Clara's wrist in the painting, the other holding a palette knife, dripping in black paint. But his eyes, they weren't fixed on Clara. They were staring out of the canvas, staring directly at me. The attic door shuddered, not from the latch, from the inside. Something heavy slammed against it once, twice. Wood cracked. Moonlight caught the edge of a black boot pressing through the splintered gap. Clara's painted eyes flicked toward the door. Her expression shifted again, not fear, but resolve. She turned fully toward the breach, her outstretched hands now aimed at the intruder. The turpentine smell turned acrid, burning. The air crackled. Frost spread rapidly across the floorboards toward the door, crawling up the splintering wood. I understood then. She wasn't trapped in the portrait. She was trapped guarding it, keeping him contained. The scratches, the sobs, the changing expressions, they weren't hauntings. They were battles. Every night Alistair fought to break free. Every night Clara held him back. But she was weakening, and my grief, my loneliness after my mother's death, my raw, open sorrow when I first moved in, had been a feast for him. He'd smelled it like blood and water. He'd been using me to erode her hold. The lullaby wasn't just Clara's voice. It was his lure, mimicking the comfort I craved, drawing me closer to the door he needed me to open. The door exploded inward. Alistair stood in the frame, not a ghost, but a thing of shadow and dried paint. His form flickered, peeling like old wallpaper, revealing glimpses of bone and river silt beneath. His eyes were pits of darkness. In his hand, the palette knife gleamed. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on Clara's portrait, on the hole in the painted earth. "Mine," he rasped, the sound like gravel in a tin can. "Time to come home, my sweet." He stepped forward. Clara's painted form rippled. Her outstretched hands glowed with a faint, silvery light. Frost shot from her fingertips, encasing Alistair's boots in ice. He snarled, shaking it off, advancing. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged thickly. The painting's surface began to bubble, the varnish cracking like ice on a pond. I didn't think. I ran not away, but toward the portrait, toward Clara. I pressed my palms flat against the cold canvas, right over her heart. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, the words ripped from me. "I'm so sorry for your pain. I'm sorry I let him use mine. You don't have to hold him alone anymore. Let go. Let go." A shock wave of cold tore through me, not painful, cleansing. Clara's painted eyes met mine. For a heartbeat, I saw not pigment and canvas, but a woman, real, terrified, unbearably sad. Then her expression softened, not into peace, into release. She lowered her hands. Alistair roared, lunging for the painting. But Clara stepped out of the frame, not as a ghost, as a ripple of moonlight and frost. She flowed between Alistair and the portrait, her form shimmering, insubstantial, yet radiating fierce warmth. She didn't fight him. She embraced him, her arms wrapped around his shadowy form. He struggled, snarling, the palette knife plunging into her light, but it passed through, harmless. "No more, Alistair," her voice whispered, not in my ears, but in my bones. No more pain, no more painting the dark. They began to dissolve, not fading, unmaking. Alistair's rage turned to confusion, then a childlike sob as the shadows peeled away, revealing the broken man beneath. Clara's light grew brighter, warmer, pulling him into its glow. The hole in the painted landscape sealed itself, replaced by the willow trees and the calm, moonlit lake. The turpentine smell vanished, replaced by the scent of dew on grass. As they faded, Clara turned her head toward me. One last look, not sadness, gratitude. Then, with a sound like a sigh through willow branches, they were gone. Silence. The attic was just an attic again. Dusty, cold, but naturally so. Dawn light seeped through the dormer window, illuminating the portrait on the east wall. It showed Clara Thorne seated calmly in her chair. Her expression was serene, peaceful. Her hands rested gently in her lap. The background was a perfect, undisturbed lake at twilight. The signature in... The corner was clear now. Clara Thorne, 1901. I took the portrait down, not to destroy it, to hang it in the sunniest room in the house, the morning room overlooking the garden. I cleaned the glass, polished the frame. Every day I sit with my coffee beneath it, watching the light shift across Clara's face. She never changes now. She just is, calm, present. The house is quiet, truly quiet. The cold spots are gone, the scratching, the singing, the feeling of being watched. They vanished. But sometimes, on still evenings when the willows sway by the lake, I catch a scent on the breeze, not turpentine, wild roses. And if I listen very closely, beneath the wind and the leaves, I hear two voices, not singing, just breathing, together. I leave the attic door unlocked now, but I never go up there. Some doors, I've learned, are best left closed, and some portraits aren't meant to be kept in the dark. Clara earned her peace. I won't disturb it, but on the hardest days, when grief for my mother feels like a stone in my chest, I still press my palm to the glass of her portrait. Warmth always blooms beneath my fingers. And in the quiet, I swear I feel the faintest pressure against my hand, like a thank you, like a promise. You're not alone. The house holds its breath. The willows whisper. And for the first time since I arrived, I believe it. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next, the shadow that follows me home. Always arrives a few seconds before I do it, started with the porch light. Not the light itself, that old yellow bug zapper bulb my landlord refused to replace, but the shadow it cast when I pulled into the driveway. I'd be turning the key in the ignition, my hand still on the gear shift, when I catch movement in my peripheral vision. A dark shape slipping past the living room window. Just a flicker. Gone before I could focus on it. The first time, I chalked it up to fatigue. I'd been working late shifts at the hospital for 3 weeks straight, my circadian rhythm shattered, my eyes playing tricks after 12 hours under fluorescent lights. The second time, I told myself it was a neighbor's cat darting through the yard, its silhouette magnified and distorted by the grimy window pane. The third time, I sat in the car for a full minute after parking, watching the dark windows of my rented bungalow, waiting to see if it would happen again. It did. I killed the engine at 11:47 p.m. Before my seatbelt even clicked loose, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness near the front door and glided across the window, left to right, smooth and deliberate, unmistakably humanoid in shape. I froze, my fingers still curled around the key fob. The shadow vanished behind the curtain covering the window's edge. I counted to 30, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then I stepped out of the car, moved quickly up the cracked concrete walkway, and unlocked the door with hands that trembled only slightly. The house was empty, exactly as I'd left it that morning. The throw blanket was draped over the arm of the sofa where I'd tossed it. The coffee mug I'd forgotten to wash sat in the sink, a faint brown ring staining its interior. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. I checked every room, the bedroom with its unmade bed, the bathroom with its damp towel on the floor, the tiny closet under the stairs where I kept my winter coats, all empty, all silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the thermostat adjusting to my presence. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the front window. The porch light cast a jaundiced glow across the porch boards, illuminating the welcome mat my predecessor had left behind. A faded thing with the words, "Gather," worn nearly illegible. For an hour, I watched. Nothing moved except moths battering themselves against the glass. At 1:03 a.m., exhaustion finally overtook vigilance. I locked the deadbolt, set the chain, and went to bed. The next night, I conducted an experiment. I parked my car 3 houses down the street, killed the engine, and approached my bungalow on foot, moving slowly, silently, hugging the shadows between streetlights. I stopped at the property line, the exact spot where my driveway met the sidewalk, and watched the house for 5 full minutes. Stillness, darkness. The porch light buzzed softly, casting its sickly halo across the porch. Then, at 11:52 p.m., the shadow appeared. It didn't emerge from inside the house. It didn't slip from behind furniture or rise from a corner. It simply coalesced. One moment, the window was empty, except for the reflection of the street lamp across the way. The next, a human-shaped darkness stood silhouetted against the curtain, its edges unnaturally sharp despite the diffusion of the fabric. It turned its head, not a quick jerk, but a slow, deliberate rotation, until it seemed to be looking directly at me, standing frozen at the edge of my property. Then it raised one arm and pointed toward the front door. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I stood there for a full minute after it vanished, my body locked in place by a terror so profound it felt like reverence. When I finally moved, it was with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield. I approached the house step by excruciating step, my keys clutched between my knuckles like a weapon. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and slammed it shut behind me, throwing both locks with frantic haste. The house was empty. Again. But something was different. On the floor directly beneath the window, where I'd seen the shadow, lying precisely centered on the worn rug, was a single object I had not left there that morning, a child's hair ribbon, pale blue satin, slightly frayed at the edges, tied in a perfect bow. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was cold, not room temperature cold. The deep, marrow-chilling cold of something that had been buried underground for a long time. I spent the next day researching the house. The county records office was a dusty room in the basement of City Hall, smelling of old paper and lemon-scented cleaner. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, pulled the property file without hesitation when I gave her the address. 1437 Maple, she said, running a finger down the ledger. Built in 1923. Owned by the Henderson family until 1978. She paused, her finger stopping on an entry from October 1978. There was an incident. My throat went dry. What kind of incident? She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. A child disappeared. 6-year-old girl named Clara Henderson vanished from her bedroom one night. They never found her, never found a suspect. Case went cold within months. She closed the file gently. The family moved out immediately after, couldn't bear to stay. House stood empty for 2 years before being sold. Did they ever find remains? I asked, my voice barely audible. She shook her head. No, but there were rumors. Unsubstantiated, of course. Some neighbors claimed they saw a man leaving the property late that night. A stranger, not from the neighborhood. Others said the father had gambling debts. The mother never recovered. Died of a broken heart, folks said. She offered a sad smile. Houses hold memories, you know. Sometimes the sad ones stick harder than the happy ones. I left the records office with Clara Henderson's name echoing in my skull. That evening, I dug deeper, searching the newspaper archives online, scrolling through microfiche images until my eyes burned. I found the article from October 17th, 1978. Local girl 6, missing from home. A grainy photograph showed a smiling child with dark braids and a gap-toothed grin, wearing a pale blue dress. The caption read, Clara Henderson, shown here at her 6th birthday party last month, was last seen wearing a blue dress and matching hair ribbons. I zoomed in on the photograph until the pixels blurred. Tied neatly around each braid was a pale blue satin ribbon, exactly like the one I'd found on my rug. That night, I didn't come home until 2 a.m. I sat in my car down the street again, watching the house through binoculars I'd borrowed from a co-worker. At 2:07 a.m., the shadow appeared at the window, not pointing this time, but standing perfectly still, its head tilted as if listening. After 30 seconds, it raised both hands and pressed them against the inside of the glass. The gesture was unmistakable, not a threat, a plea. I waited until 3 a.m. before approaching the house. This time, I didn't rush inside. I stood on the porch for a full minute, my hand on the doorknob, listening. The house was silent. I unlocked the door and stepped inside slowly, leaving the door open behind me. The ribbon was gone from the rug. In its place lay a small tarnished locket, silver, heart-shaped, its surface scratched and dull with age. I picked it up with a handkerchief from my pocket and pried it open with my thumbnail. Inside, protected by cloudy glass, was a tiny photograph of Clara Henderson, and tucked behind the photograph a folded slip of paper so brittle it crackled when I unfolded it. In a child's careful printing it read, "He comes through the walls. He wears my father's face, but it is not my father. Tell them I did not run away. Tell them I am still here." Asterisk ice. Water flooded my veins. I stumbled backward, dropping the locket as if burned. My eyes scanned the room, the walls, the ceiling, the floor, searching for what I now understood I should have been looking for all along. Not an intruder coming through doors or windows. Something that moved through solid matter. Something that wore familiar faces to gain trust. Something that had taken a 6-year-old girl from her bed and hidden her so completely that not even her bones had ever been found, and something that was now trying to communicate with me through shadows and artifacts. The next day, I contacted the cold case division of the local police department. I spoke to a detective named Ruiz, a weary man in his 50s with kind eyes and a voice worn smooth by decades of delivering bad news. I told him everything: the shadow at the window, the ribbon, the locket, the note. I didn't mention the supernatural elements. I framed it as a possible break-in, a stalker leaving increasingly disturbing tokens. I showed him photographs of the items I'd found. He listened patiently, taking notes without interruption. When I finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Chen, I appreciate you coming forward, truly. But the Clara Henderson case, we've had dozens of tips over the years. Psychics claiming to channel her spirit, neighbors confessing on their deathbeds, treasure hunters digging up backyards based on dreams. Nothing ever panned out." He slid a file across the desk toward me. "We never stopped looking, but after 45 years, the trail's cold, literally and figuratively." I opened the file. Crime scene photographs from 1978. Clara's bedroom, neatly made bed, stuffed animals arranged on the pillow, a small desk with crayons and coloring books, and on the wall beside the bed, a faint water stain in the shape of a child's handprint. The caption read, "Unexplained moisture stain, noted by first responders. No source identified." "May I?" I asked, pointing to the photograph. Ruiz nodded. "Go ahead. It's all public record now." I studied the handprint stain. It wasn't random. The fingers were splayed wide, the palm pressed flat against the wall as if in panic, and beneath it, almost invisible unless you knew to look, were tiny scratches in the plaster, so faint they could have been accidental marks from moving furniture. But they weren't. They formed letters, 3 of them, H-E-L. I looked up at Ruiz. "Did anyone ever analyze these scratches?" He shrugged. "Forensics in 78 wasn't what it is today. They noted the stain, but dismissed it as condensation. The scratches, probably just wear and tear." But I knew better. Clara hadn't just vanished. She'd tried to leave a message, scratched into the wall from the other side. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my armchair facing the front window, a baseball bat resting across my knees, every light in the house burning bright. At 11:59 p.m., the shadow appeared, not at the window this time, but in the center of the living room. It didn't flicker or fade. It simply stood there, a perfect silhouette of a small girl in a dress, her hands hanging at her sides, and then she moved, not toward me, toward the wall between the living room and Clara's old bedroom, the wall that still bore the water stain shaped like a child's hand. The shadow pressed its palms against the plaster, and the wall began to weep, not metaphorically. Actual moisture seeped from the surface, tracing the outline of small hands pressed flat against the other side. The plaster darkened, bubbling slightly as if something behind it was breathing against the barrier. And then, faint but unmistakable, came a sound, not through the air, but vibrating directly through the floorboards beneath my feet. A child's voice, muffled as if heard through layers of earth and stone. "He is coming. Hide." I didn't think. I didn't question. I dropped the bat and ran, not out the front door, but toward the back of the house, into the tiny bathroom with its single window overlooking the alley. I locked the door behind me and stood pressed against the tiles, my breath coming in ragged gasps. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The house remained silent. Then I heard it, the soft, wet sound of something moving through solid matter. Not footsteps, something worse. The sound of flesh parting plaster, of bone sliding between molecules. It came from the living room first, then the hallway, then stopped directly outside the bathroom door. The doorknob began to turn, not rattling, not forcing, turning smoothly, deliberately, as if operated by an invisible hand. I backed into the corner, my eyes fixed on the door, my entire body rigid with terror. The knob turned fully. The latch clicked open, but the door didn't swing inward. Instead, the wood itself began to change. The grain darkened, swirling into patterns that resolved into a face, a man's face, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that belonged on a father's face. But the smile was wrong, too wide, too many teeth, and the eyes held no warmth, only hunger. The face in the door spoke, its voice a wet whisper that seemed to come from inside my own skull. "Clara? Is that you, sweetheart? Daddy's here. Come out. It's time to come home." Asterisk. I clapped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, refusing to look at the thing wearing a father's face. And in that darkness behind my eyelids, I saw it. Not with my eyes, but with something deeper. Clara Henderson, not as a ghost or a memory, but as she existed now. A consciousness trapped between worlds, her physical form dissolved into the very structure of the house, her essence woven into the plaster and wood and pipes, her final moments of terror preserved like an insect in amber. She hadn't died that night in 1978. Something had taken her, not to kill her, but to consume her slowly, to feed on her fear over decades, to keep her conscious and suffering as a perpetual source of sustenance. And the thing wearing her father's face was the predator that had done it, an entity that could move through walls, that could mimic loved ones, that fed on the terror of the trapped, and it had found a new source of food, me. The face in the door began to distort, the smile stretching wider, the eyes sinking into black pits. "You see her, don't you? it whispered. "You see my little girl. She's been so lonely. But you can keep her company. You can stay with her forever." I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. The thing was feeding on my fear already, drawing it out of me like smoke from a fire, growing stronger with every heartbeat of panic. And then a small, cool hand slipped into mine. I opened my eyes. Clara stood beside me, not as a shadow, not as a projection, but solid and real, her small fingers wrapped tightly around mine. She wore the blue dress from the photograph, her braids tied with fresh ribbons. She looked up at me, her eyes clear and calm, and shook her head slowly. "Don't be afraid," she mouthed. "Fear is what it eats. Give it boredom, give it nothing." She squeezed my hand once, then released it and turned toward the door, toward the thing wearing her father's face. She didn't look afraid. She looked resolved. "You don't own me anymore," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her small size. "You never did. I was always here, and I was always watching." The face in the door contorted in rage, the wood splintering as something tried to force its way through. But Clara stepped forward and placed her palm flat against the surface. Where her hand touched, the wood didn't burn or crackle, it simply unmade itself. The molecules separated, the structure dissolved, and a hole opened in the door, not a tear or a break, but a perfect circle through which I could see the hallway beyond. And standing in that hallway was not a monster, not a predator, but a man, a real man, gaunt and hollow-eyed, wearing the tattered remains of 1970s clothing, his hands raised in surrender. "Clara," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought you ran away. I thought I'd failed you." It was her real father, not the thing that had taken her, not the predator wearing his face, the actual man who had spent 45 years drowning in grief, who had died years ago still searching for his daughter, whose spirit had lingered in this house, hoping against hope that she might still be found. Clara looked at him, her expression softening. "I know, Daddy," she said. "I always knew." She turned back to me, her eyes meeting mine one last time. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered, "for listening, for not being afraid at the end." Then she took her father's hand, and together they walked through the wall, not vanishing, but stepping into a light that hadn't been there a moment before, a soft golden radiance that filled the hallway and then faded, leaving only an empty house and a door with a perfect circle cut through its center. The thing that had worn her father's face was gone, not destroyed, not banished, but starved, deprived of the fear it needed to sustain itself. Without terror to feed on, it had simply unraveled. I moved out the next day. I didn't pack carefully. I threw clothes into suitcases, left furniture behind, abandoned dishes in the sink. I couldn't bear to spend another night in that house, even though I knew it was safe now, even though the walls no longer held a trapped child's terror. But the shadow didn't leave with me. I discovered this 3 nights later in my new apartment, a sterile studio on the 4th floor of a modern complex with electronic locks and security cameras. I'd just stepped off the elevator, my arms full of grocery bags, when I saw it through the peephole. A small human-shaped darkness moving across my living room window. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking so badly I dropped them twice before getting the door open. The apartment was empty, clean, uninhabited, except for me. But on the floor directly beneath the window, centered perfectly on the industrial carpet, lay a single pale blue hair ribbon, fresh, untarnished, tied in a perfect bow. I didn't pick it up. I didn't run. I simply stood there, tears streaming down my face, understanding finally dawning. Clara hadn't been trapped in that house. She'd been trapped in the moment of her greatest terror, the moment she realized the man standing over her bed wasn't her father, and that moment had followed her, would always follow her, until someone witnessed it without fear, until someone saw her not as a victim, but as a survivor, until someone stayed when every instinct screamed to run. The shadow that follows me home always arrives a few seconds before I do, not because it's haunting me, but because it's waiting for me. Because after 45 years of solitude, a child who died alone finally has someone to come home to, someone who sees her, someone who isn't afraid. Some nights, when the apartment is quiet and the city lights paint patterns on the ceiling, I feel a small weight settle on the edge of my bed. I don't open my eyes. I just reach out my hand, and a small, cool hand slips into mine. We sit together in the darkness, not in fear, but in companionship, not as victim and witness, but as friends. The shadow still arrives before I do. But now, when I open the door, I'm not afraid to find what's waiting on the other side, because sometimes the things that follow us home aren't monsters. Sometimes they're just lost children who need someone to see them, to remember them, to hold their hand until the light finally comes. And when that light comes, and it will come, Clara promises, it won't be a predator wearing a father's face. It will be her real father waiting with open arms. And she won't be alone when she steps into it. She'll be holding my hand, because some bonds aren't broken by death. Some connections transcend walls and time and terror. Some friendships are forged in the space between heartbeats, in the silence after a scream, in the courage to stay when every instinct says to run. The shadow arrives before I do. But now, when I step through the door, I'm not entering a haunted house. I'm coming home to a friend. And in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the world holds its breath and the veil grows thin, I am not alone. I am keeping watch. I am bearing witness. I am holding the hand of a child who was lost for 45 years until she finally found someone willing to see her, not as a ghost, not as a tragedy, but as Clara, 6 years old, wearing blue ribbons in her hair, and finally, after all this time, not afraid anymore. The story ends here. Let's begin the next one. Voices keep whispering through the keyhole of my bedroom door. The house on Hemlock Street wasn't a choice. It was surrender. After the divorce papers dried and the bank account bled out, the only thing left that didn't require a credit check or a cosigner was this sagging Victorian relic on the edge of town, inherited from an aunt I barely remembered. Its address was a footnote in my life until everything else collapsed. The realtor, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, called it a fixer-upper with character. He didn't mention the way the floorboards groaned like wounded animals beneath your feet, or how the perpetual scent of damp plaster clung to the air no matter how many windows you threw open. He certainly didn't mention the keyhole. My bedroom was at the end of the second-floor hallway, a small, high-ceilinged room with a single window overlooking the overgrown backyard. The door was solid oak, heavy and old, with a tarnished brass knob and a keyhole that looked like a dark, unblinking eye. The first night, exhausted from hauling boxes and the weight of my own failure, I barely noticed it. I locked the door out of habit, a flimsy ritual of safety, and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. I woke just after 3 a.m., not to a sound, but to a presence. The room was freezing, my breath frosting in the moonlight, slicing through the window, and then I heard it, faint, delicate, like dry leaves skittering across stone. It came from the keyhole. Jamie. My childhood name, the one only my grandmother used, the one I hadn't heard in 20 years. My skin prickled. I sat up, straining in the gloom. Silence. Just the old house settling. I told myself it was the wind whistling through a crack, or maybe a neighbor's late-night argument drifting up from the street. I pulled the blankets tighter, dismissing it as the fractured dream logic of a stressed mind. But the cold didn't leave. It deepened, centering on the door. The next night it was clearer, not wind, a whisper, low and wet, as if the speaker's mouth was filled with soil. Cold in the walls, Jamie, so cold. It was a woman's voice, young but layered with a terrible weariness. I froze in bed, heart hammering against my ribs. I flicked on the bedside lamp. The warm light did nothing to dispel the chill radiating from the door. I crept closer, stopping a foot away. The keyhole was just a dark circle in the brass plate. I pressed my ear to the wood beside it, holding my breath. Silence. Then closer, intimate, as if the lips were pressed against the other side of the keyhole. You left the light on? She always left the light on. A pause, a soft, wet sniffle. It made the shadows jump. I recoiled like I'd been burned. Who was she? My grandmother? I'd never told anyone about her habit of sleeping with the hall light on, terrified of the dark corners of her own bedroom. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through my exhaustion. I threw back the covers and yanked open the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. Dust motes danced in the amber glow of the single bulb at the far end. The door to the spare room across the hall stood shut. The bathroom door was closed. Downstairs, the grandfather clock in the foyer gave a single hollow bonk. 3:07 a.m. I stood there, shivering in my sweatpants, listening to the silence of the empty house. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Pipes, mice in the walls, auditory hallucinations triggered by stress and cheap wine. But the voice had known my name, my childhood name, and the detail about the light. That was a memory buried so deep I hadn't thought of it in decades. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the armchair by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the door. The cold spot near the keyhole never faded. The whispers became a nightly ritual, always starting just after 3 a.m., always through the keyhole. Sometimes they were fragmented, nonsensical. The peaches are rotten on the vine, or sewed the buttons on backwards. Other times, chillingly precise. You cried when the goldfish died, Jamie. You buried it under the lilac bush. I had buried a goldfish under a lilac bush when I was 6. My mother had scolded me for digging up her garden. No one else knew that. No one. The voice never raised. It never threatened. It just observed, reminisced. It spoke of small, forgotten things. The pattern of chipped paint on my grandmother's kitchen ceiling, the smell of the lavender sachets she kept in her dresser drawers, the exact shade of blue on my first bicycle. It spoke with a familiarity that curdled my blood. It knew the texture of my childhood fears. "You were afraid of the clown lamp in the hallway," it whispered one night, its breath frosting the brass keyhole plate. "The one with the too wide smile. You made her cover it with a towel." My throat closed. I had made my grandmother cover that hideous lamp. I'd been 7. I started researching the house. The local historical society archives were dusty and smelled of mildew. The house was built in 1898 for a man named Silas Crow, a reclusive watchmaker. His wife Eleanor died young. Consumption, the record said. They had one daughter, Clara. Clara vanished in 1913 at the age of 12. No body was ever found, presumed runaway or worse. The file contained a single faded photograph, a stern-faced man, a frail woman, holding a little girl with dark braids and wide, solemn eyes. Clara's eyes. I stared at that photo for a long time, a cold certainty settling in my gut. The voice wasn't my grandmother's, it was Clara's. Trapped. Waiting. I bought a heavy deadbolt for my bedroom door. The hardware store clerk, an old man with rheumy eyes, watched me carefully as I paid. "House on Hemlock, eh?" he rasped. "That deadbolt won't hold back what's already inside." I ignored him, my hands trembling as I installed it that afternoon, the brass key cold in my palm. That night, I locked both the knob and the deadbolt, double-checking the chain I'd also added. I left the bedside lamp burning, a fragile island of light in the oppressive dark. 3:03 a.m. The cold seeped through the wood, deeper than before. The keyhole seemed to breathe a plume of frost onto the hallway side of the door, and the whisper came, muffled but clear through the layers of wood and metal. "You put up walls, Jamie, like she did, but walls have holes, walls have eyes." A pause, a wet clicking sound like a tongue against dry teeth. "I can see you under the blanket. Your eyes are open. You're scared. Don't be scared. I just want to talk like we used to." I buried my face in the pillow, tears hot on my cheeks. "I never knew you," I whispered back, my voice raw. "I wasn't even born when you disappeared." Silence. Then a sound that wasn't a whisper, a soft, broken sob so close it felt like it came from inside the room with me. "You were born from her tears." The voice sighed. "She cried for me every night after you came, after the other baby came. She held you and whispered my name into your hair. You carry her sadness. You carry my silence." The words struck a chord so deep it stole my breath. My mother had been prone to sudden, inexplicable bouts of weeping when I was a child. She'd never explained why. The deadbolt was useless. The next morning, I found the chain lying on the floor, snapped cleanly in half as if crushed by invisible hands. The deadbolt was thrown back. The keyhole plate was frosted over, intricate ice crystals spreading across the brass like delicate lace. And on the hallway floor, directly in front of my door, lay a single, perfect, dew-kissed dandelion puffball. It shouldn't have survived the frost. It shouldn't have been there at all. Desperation drove me to the local library's occult section, a dusty corner, smelling of neglect. I found a crumbling volume on Victorian spiritualism and home hauntings. The pages crackled as I turned them under the flickering fluorescent light. One passage stood out, underlined in faded pencil by some previous reader. "The lingerers bind themselves to apertures, keyholes, cracks beneath doors, the spaces between floorboards. These become their mouths, their eyes. They whisper not to frighten, but to be heard, to be remembered. They feed on attention, on the warmth of a living voice answering back. Silence starves them. Denial starves them. But acknowledgement invites them in. Below it, in a different hand, someone had scrawled, "Don't answer, don't give it your name." That night, I barricaded the door with my heavy oak dresser. I turned off all lights. I lay in the pitch black, covers pulled over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, repeating in my head, "I don't hear you. I don't know you. You are not here." The cold intensified, biting through the blankets. The keyhole became a vortex of freezing air. The whispers started anyway, muffled but persistent, slithering under the door, through the cracks. "Jamie, why won't you talk to me? It's lonely in the walls. Remember the dandelions? We made wishes." She promised she'd find me. She never looked under the floorboards. The last one cut through my resolve. Under the floorboards? My grandmother's house had wide, creaking floorboards. I'd spent hours prying them up, searching for lost marbles. I'd never thought to wonder what else might be hidden beneath. I couldn't take it. My voice tore from my throat, harsh and trembling. "What floorboards? Clara, what floorboards?" Silence, thick, heavy, expectant. Then a sigh of pure relief that seemed to warm the freezing air for a fraction of a second. "You remember my name?" The whisper breathed, filled with a terrible, childlike joy. "You came back." The dresser blocking the door groaned. Not the house settling. A deep, resonant creak of stressed wood. The legs scraped slowly, deliberately across the hardwood floor, inching away from the door. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat I kept propped by the window. The deadbolt clicked open by itself. The doorknob turned. The door swung inward silently. The hallway was dark, colder than my room. At the far end, near the top of the stairs, stood a figure, small, dressed in a simple, old-fashioned white nightgown, stained dark at the hem. Its back was to me. Its dark hair was in two braids, just like the girl in the photograph. It didn't turn. It just stood there, staring down the dark staircase. The air smelled of wet earth and crushed dandelions. "Clara?" My voice was a thread. Slowly, painfully slowly, the figure began to turn. Not its body, just its head. It rotated a full 180 degrees on its thin neck, the braids swinging forward. Where a face should have been was a smooth, featureless oval of pale, damp-looking skin. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, wet blankness. But from that blankness came the whisper, clear and close, as if standing right beside me in the room. "She kept me under the floorboards, Jamie, in the dark. She was afraid of what Father would do if he found me broken." A wet, choked sound. "I waited so long for her to come back. She never did, but you have her eyes, her sadness. You called my name." The featureless face tilted. The blankness seemed to drink the dim light from my room. "Come see," it whispered. "Come see where I wait. It's warmer with two." The small figure took a step towards me, gliding silently over the floorboards. The cold radiating from it made my teeth chatter. The smell of grave soil filled my nostrils. I raised the bat, my arms shaking. "Stay back!" The blank face didn't react. But the whisper came again, not from the figure now, but from the keyhole behind me, from the crack under my door, from the very walls themselves. A chorus of wet, overlapping voices, all Clara's, all layered with the echoes of other children, other lost voices. "She's afraid. She always was afraid. But you don't have to be afraid, Jamie. The dark isn't empty. The dark is full of us, waiting, remembering. Come hold my hand. It's not cold where I am, not anymore. The figure reached out a small, pale hand. The fingers were too long. The nails were black and broken. It wasn't the hand of a child. It was the hand of something that had been buried, something that had learned to wait in the absolute dark for a century. I screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure terror. I swung the bat wildly, not at the figure, but at the door. I slammed it shut, throwing my weight against it, fumbling for the deadbolt with numb fingers. I heard a soft thump as the figure hit the other side. Then silence. The cold receded just a fraction. I slid down the door, the bat clattering to the floor, sobbing. I didn't leave the room for 2 days. I had water bottles and protein bars in my backpack. I pushed the dresser back against the door. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the corner farthest from the keyhole, watching it, waiting. The whispers didn't return. The cold didn't return. The silence was worse. It felt like being watched, waited for. On the third night, exhaustion won. My head nodded forward. I jerked awake just after 3 a.m. The room was freezing. My breath plumed in the moonlight. The keyhole was frosted over again, intricate ice crystals spreading like veins across the brass. And the whisper came, softer than ever, intimate, filled with a terrible understanding. You're tired, Jamie. We're all tired. The walls are tired. The floorboards are tired. Let me in. Let me show you where it's quiet, where no one will ever leave you again. I didn't answer. I pressed my back harder against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. But the voice wasn't done. It shifted. Became my grandmother's voice, thin and frail with age, the voice I remembered from childhood summers. Oh, my sweet Jamie girl, come to Nana. It's all right. It's just Clara. She's lonely. She just wants a friend. Let her in. It's so dark under the floorboards. So dark. The voice broke into a sob that echoed the one I'd heard through the keyhole. I should have looked. I was so afraid. Forgive me, Jamie, forgive me. Tears streamed down my face. The guilt, the old buried guilt of a child who sensed a deep sorrow she couldn't fix, surged up. My grandmother had carried this for 60 years, and now Clara carried it too, trapped, waiting, wanting only to be remembered, to be seen. The deadbolt clicked open, not rattled, not forced. It simply unlatched with a soft, final snick. The chain, already broken, hung loose. The dresser groaned again, scraping back from the door without visible force. The brass knob turned slowly. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the bat. The cold wasn't just in the room anymore. It was in my bones, a deep, familiar ache. The whisper came again, not from the keyhole now, but from right beside me on the bed. A small, cold weight settled on the mattress. The smell of damp earth and crushed dandelions filled my nose. A small, icy hand touched mine where it lay clenched on my knee. The fingers were long. The nails were broken. "Shh," Clara whispered, her voice now a blend of the child and the ancient thing she'd become, a sound like roots shifting in deep soil. No more walls, no more locks, just quiet, just us. Her featureless face, smooth and wet in the moonlight, hovered near mine. There was no malice in the blankness, only a bottomless, patient hunger for connection, for an end to the silence. "Tell me about the goldfish," she breathed, her cold breath frosting my cheek. "Tell me his name." I closed my eyes. The cold hand tightened on mine, not painfully, but with a desperate clinging need. The voice of my grandmother faded, replaced by the deep, resonant hum of the old house settling, not wood on wood, but stone on stone, earth on bone. The frost on the keyhole glowed faintly in the dark. The whispers didn't stop. They multiplied. Faint, overlapping murmurs seeped from the walls, the floorboards, the very air. Stay, remember us. Be quiet with us. My grandmother's voice surfaced one last time, a sigh in the chorus. It's all right, Jamie girl. It's warm in the dark, warmer than alone. I turned my head slowly on the pillow. In the moonlight, the smooth, wet oval of Clara's face reflected the pale light. No eyes to look into, no mouth to read. Just an emptiness that promised an end to loneliness, an end to being the one left behind. The small, cold hand squeezed mine again. A question, an invitation. The whispers swelled, a gentle tide of forgotten names and half-remembered sorrows. The cold wasn't biting anymore. It was deep. It was familiar. It was the cold of the earth waiting, the cold of a secret kept too long. My lips moved, dry and cracked. The name came out a whisper, lost in the chorus, but she heard it. She always heard. Bubbles, I breathed. The cold hand tightened. A sigh of profound relief, like the earth finally accepting a long-awaited rain, filled the room. The whispers softened, harmonizing into a single, deep, comforting vibration that resonated in my bones. The frost on the keyhole melted, dripping onto the floorboards like tears. The moonlight seemed to dim, not fading, but deepening, becoming richer, softer, safer. I didn't get up. I didn't reach for the light. I turned my hand in Clara's icy grip, lacing my fingers through hers. The broken nails scratched my skin, but the pain was distant, unimportant. The vibration grew stronger, a lullaby hummed by the house itself, by the earth beneath it, by all the quiet ones waiting in the walls. The smell of damp earth and dandelions wrapped around me like a blanket. Warmth began to seep into my frozen limbs, not the heat of a fire, but the deep, slow warmth of stone absorbing the sun, the warmth of belonging. The last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was the keyhole. No longer a dark eye, it glowed with a soft, steady light, the color of old honey, a welcome light. The whispers weren't in my ears anymore. They were in my blood, in my breath, in the slow, steady beat of my heart, finally syncing with the deep, patient rhythm of the house. Clara's head rested gently on my shoulder, a small, cold weight that felt like home. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was waiting. It was mine. I sank into the mattress, deeper than I'd ever sunk before. The bed wasn't just under me anymore. It was part of the floor, part of the walls, part of the dark, warm earth beneath the floorboards. The last coherent thought drifted away like a dandelion seed on a breeze. No one will ever leave us here. And then there was only the hum, the deep, resonant hum of the walls, the hum of the quiet, the hum of home. I smiled in the perfect, waiting dark. Clara's fingers tightened on mine. The keyhole light dimmed, not going out, but sinking deep like a star settling into the earth. And the house on Hemlock Street held its breath, full at last. This story ends here. It's time to move on to the next. I answered a late-night room rental ad that I still can't forget. I wasn't looking for something permanent. That's important. If I had been trying to settle, I might have been more careful. But I only needed a place for a month, maybe two. Somewhere cheap, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could sleep. I had just started a night shift job at a warehouse on the edge of the city. The pay was decent, but the hours were brutal, and most landlords didn't like the idea of someone coming and going at odd times. Hotels were too expensive, friends' couches were already worn thin, so I searched online, scrolling through local listings at 3 in the morning, eyes dry, brain half off. That's when I saw the post. No photos, no description really. Room for rent, private, quiet house, close to transit, cheap, call only. It had been reposted several times over the past few weeks. No comments, no replies underneath. That should have bothered me more than it did. I called. The man answered after the second ring. His voice was calm, steady, and oddly awake for the hour. "Yes," he said before I could speak. "The room is still available." We set a time for me to come by later that day. He gave me the address. Before hanging up, he said something that stuck with me. "I don't usually rent to night workers," he said, "but you might be a good fit." I didn't ask what he meant. The house was in an older part of the city, one of those neighborhoods that used to be nice and then got forgotten instead of ruined. Tall trees, narrow streets, homes built close together, each one slightly different, like they were designed by memory instead of plans. The house itself was tall and narrow, with dark siding and a porch that leaned just a little to the left. Nothing was broken, nothing was boarded up. It just felt off, like it was holding its breath. The man opened the door before I knocked. Up close, he looked older than I expected. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray hair combed neatly back, clean clothes, no smell of smoke or alcohol. His eyes were alert, but tired. "You're right on time," he said. Inside the house was very quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. Like sound. Didn't like being there. No TV noise, no radio, no hum of appliances. Even the refrigerator didn't make a sound. I became very aware of my own breathing. He showed me the room upstairs, small but clean. A bed, a dresser, a desk, a single window facing the side yard. The lock on the door worked, which made me feel better. The price was lower than anything else I'd seen. "Any rules?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yes," he said. "Please don't leave your room between midnight and 4 a.m. And if you hear anything unusual, ignore it." I smiled, thinking he was trying to scare me. He didn't smile back. I moved in that night. The first few days were normal enough. I worked, came home, slept during the day. The house stayed quiet, too quiet. I never heard the owner move around. I never heard him cook, shower, or watch TV. Sometimes I wondered if he left at all. On the fourth night, I came home early. My shift ended sooner than usual, and I arrived around 11:30 p.m. The house was dark. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. As soon as I closed it behind me, I felt it. That feeling you get when you realize you're not alone. I stood still, listening. From upstairs came a faint sound, slow footsteps, bare feet, moving carefully like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I assumed it was the owner and started up the stairs. Halfway up, the footsteps stopped. Then they turned around. They came toward the stairs. I froze. A shape appeared at the top step, tall, thin, just a shadow against the darker hallway behind it. "Hello?" I said. The shape didn't move. Then slowly it stepped back out of sight. I waited a full minute before going up the rest of the way. The hallway was empty. All the doors were closed. I didn't sleep much that night. After that, things started to change. I began hearing sounds during the day, light tapping from inside the walls, soft dragging noises above the ceiling. Once, I heard what sounded like someone quietly crying from the room next to mine, even though I knew for a fact no one lived there. I asked the owner about it. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "The house settles." I asked him if anyone else stayed there before me. "Yes," he said. "Where are they now?" "Not here," he replied. That was the end of the conversation. The first really bad night happened a week later. I woke up at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of someone whispering my name. Not shouting, not calling, whispering right outside my door. I lay completely still, heart pounding, staring at the dark shape of the door. The whisper came again, slower this time, like whoever was saying it was tasting. The sound, my name, then a soft knock, one knock, then another. I held my breath. The handle turned slightly, stopped, then turned back. Footsteps moved away down the hall. In the morning, I found scratches on the outside of my door, long, thin marks, like fingernails dragged down the wood. I didn't tell the owner. Sleep became difficult. When I did sleep, I dreamed of the house, hallways that stretched to toggle, doors that opened into rooms that didn't exist, people standing in corners facing the walls, whispering to themselves. One night, I woke up standing in the hallway. I don't remember getting out of bed. I was barefoot, facing the stairs, my body stiff like it didn't belong to me. From downstairs came a low sound like slow breathing, but deeper than a person's. I went back to my room and locked the door. The next morning, the lock was open. I started counting the footsteps. There were always more than one set, sometimes two, sometimes three. Once, I counted at least 6, moving in different directions, stopping and starting like they were confused or arguing silently. They never went downstairs between midnight and 4. They only stayed on my floor. One night, I heard them go into the empty room at the end of the hall. I heard the door open. I heard something heavy dragged across the floor. Then I heard crying. It sounded close, familiar. It sounded like me. I decided to leave. I packed my bags at noon and planned to go straight to a motel after my shift. I just needed one more night. That night, the house felt different, heavier. The air was warm and smelled faintly metallic, like blood. At exactly midnight, the footsteps started all at once, running, doors opening and closing, whispering turning into low, urgent murmurs. My doorknob shook violently. Something hit the door hard enough to make the frame crack. I screamed for the owner. The noise stopped instantly. The hallway went silent. I opened the door. At the end of the hall, the owner stood at the top of the stairs. "They know you're leaving," he said calmly. I asked him what they were. He sighed, like someone tired of explaining the same thing over and over. "This house attracts people who don't want to be alone," he said. "Sometimes they stay longer than their bodies do." I asked him why he rented rooms here. He looked at me with something close to pity. "Someone has to feed the house," he said. The lights went out. Hands grabbed me from behind, cold hands. Too many fingers. I don't remember how I got out. I woke up in my car, parked 3 blocks away, my bags in the back seat. My phone said it was 4:07 a.m. I never went back. I still hear footsteps at night. Not every night, just when I'm alone. They stop outside my bedroom door and wait. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear the owner's voice in my head, calm and steady. You were a good fit, and I know the house is still hungry. That's where this tale ends. Now, another waits just beyond the shadows. The mirror in our hallway shows someone who isn't in the house. It was the first thing we saw when we signed the papers for the old Victorian on Sycamore Street. Not the peeling gingerbread trim or the sagging porch, but the mirror. It hung in the narrow front hallway, directly opposite the front door. A tall, ornate thing in a tarnished silver frame, its glass wavy and clouded with age. Original to the house, the realtor chirped, oblivious to the way my wife Lena's smile tightened. Such character! Lena hated it immediately, said it gave her the creeps. I called it practical. It was the only mirror in the entryway, but it wasn't practical. It was a window, and something on the other side was watching. The first time I noticed it was subtle. I was alone, dropping my keys into the bowl beneath it after work. In the glass, my reflection moved just a fraction too slow, like a lagging video feed. I blinked, shook my head. Tired. New house jitters. But later that night, Lena whispered in the dark, "Did you see it too? In the mirror? When I was putting on my shoes this morning, there was someone behind me for just a second, a woman in a dark dress." I dismissed it. Stress. A trick of the warped glass. Until I saw her myself. It was a Tuesday. Rain lashed the windows. I was alone, sorting mail in the quiet hallway. I glanced up at the mirror as I passed. My reflection was there, yes, but behind my shoulder, in the space where the empty hallway should have been, stood a woman. She was tall, gaunt, dressed in a high-collared black dress that looked decades out of date. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with deep-set eyes that held a sadness so profound it made my chest ache. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring down the hall towards the kitchen, her expression one of desperate longing. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing, just the empty hallway, the sound of rain, the smell of damp wool from my coat. I turned back to the mirror. She was gone. Only my own wide-eyed face stared back, pale and shaken. Lena started avoiding the hallway. She'd take the long way around through the dining room to get to the kitchen. "It's not right," she'd mutter, wrapping her arms around herself. "She's always looking for something or someone." I tried logic. Research. The house was built in 1890, owned by the Ainsley family for generations. Records were spotty, but I found a faded newspaper clipping from 1923. Eleanor Ainsley, 38, lost to influenza. Leaves husband and infant son. The photo showed a young woman with dark hair and those same deep, sorrowful eyes. Eleanor. The name settled in my bones like cold stone. The mirror's rules became clear. It only showed her when you were alone, never when two people stood together before it, and she never looked at the viewer. Always down the hall towards the back of the house, the direction of the nursery, the old nursery, now our storage room. The sight of her became a physical weight. Coming home from work, my hand would hover over the doorknob, dreading that glance into the glass. Sometimes she'd be there, standing silently in the reflection's hallway, wringing her hands. Other times she'd be crouched near the floorboards, as if searching for something small. Once I saw her gently touch the reflection of the door to the storage room, her fingers tracing the wood grain with heartbreaking tenderness. The air around the mirror would turn icy cold when she appeared, and a faint scent, like old roses and dust, would hang in the air long after she vanished. Lena couldn't take it anymore. "We have to cover it," she insisted one evening, her voice brittle. "Or take it down. It's not healthy. She's not ours." I agreed, though part of me felt a strange protectiveness towards Eleanor's silent vigil. That night, after Lena went to bed, I stood before the mirror alone. The glass was fogged, as if breathed upon. In the condensation, words appeared, written in a shaky lupin hand. "He won't let me see him." My breath caught. Him, the infant son, Thomas, who'd grown up, inherited the house, died childless decades ago. Who was Eleanor waiting for now? I found a heavy quilt Lena had chosen. As I unfolded it, the hallway temperature plummeted. My breath plumed white. The mirror's surface rippled like dark water. Eleanor appeared. Not in the hallway reflection this time. She was in the glass, standing right behind my reflection, so close her cold breath seemed to kiss the back of my neck. Her eyes, wide and impossibly sad, met mine through the mirror, not looking past me, looking at me. For the first time, her lips moved, forming silent words. "Please." The quilt slipped from my numb fingers. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her hand, pale and translucent, pressed against the inside of the glass. It left a perfect frost-rhymed handprint that didn't fade when she vanished seconds later, leaving only the icy handprint and the scent of grave soil. We covered the mirror the next day, heavy blackout cloth nailed tightly over the frame. The house felt lighter, warmer. Lena slept through the night for the first time in weeks. I almost believed it was over until a dream started. Vivid, suffocating dreams of standing in a darkened nursery, moonlight through a grimy window, a crib, and the sound of a baby crying, a thin, weak wail that cut through the silence, and always just outside the nursery door in the dream hallway, a woman's muffled sobs. Eleanor's sobs. I'd wake gasping, the sound of that crying echoing in my ears, the smell of old roses thick in the bedroom air. Lena never heard it, only me. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Lena was away visiting her mother. The house felt unnaturally silent, oppressive. I was making tea in the kitchen when I heard it, faint at first, a soft, rhythmic thumping like a small fist against wood, coming from the hallway, from behind the covered mirror. I crept out, my mug forgotten. The cloth over the mirror was bulging inward, straining against the nails. Thump, 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 a child's fist, and beneath it, Eleanor's voice, raw with tears, whispering through the cloth. "Thomas, Mama's here. Please, open the door." The nails holding the cloth began to pop out one by one, showering the floor with plaster dust. The cloth billowed like a sail catching wind. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The thumping grew frantic. Thump, thump, thump. The final nail tore free. The cloth fell away. The mirror wasn't reflecting the hallway. It showed a small, dimly lit room, a nursery. Moonlight streamed through a dusty window, illuminating a simple wooden crib. And standing beside it, her back to the glass, was Eleanor. She was gently rocking the crib, humming a lullaby I'd never heard, but somehow knew in my marrow. In the crib, a tiny bundle stirred. A weak cry escaped, a real, living sound that echoed through the glass into my silent hallway. Eleanor turned slightly, her face illuminated by the moonlight. Not sad now, radiant, peaceful. She looked directly at me through the glass, her eyes filled with a love so fierce it stole my breath. She placed a finger to her lips. "Shh." Then she gestured subtly towards the nursery door. A door that in the mirror world stood slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me, wide with sudden, desperate fear. "He's coming." A shadow filled the doorway in the mirror, tall, imposing, silhouetted against the hall light. Not Thomas, grown old. Something else. Something that radiated cold malice. Eleanor grabbed the edge of the crib, pulling it back, shielding the baby with her body. The shadow man stepped into the nursery. He didn't have a face, just a deeper darkness where one should be. He reached a long, shadowed hand towards the crib. Eleanor let out a silent scream, throwing herself over her child. I acted without thought. I grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the hall table and swung it with all my strength at the mirror. Glass exploded outwards in a deadly rain of shards. The image of the nursery, Eleanor's terrified face, the shadow hand reaching for the crib, all vanished in a spiderweb of fractures. The cold vanished. The scent of roses faded. Silence crashed down thick with the smell of dust and broken glass. I sank to my knees in the debris, shaken, cuts stinging on my arms from the flying shards. The hallway was just a hallway again. The mirror was a jagged hole in the wall, reflecting only broken plaster and dangling wires. Relief flooded me, so intense it made me dizzy. It was over. I'd saved them. I'd broken the window. But as I sat there catching my breath, a single shard of mirror, no bigger than my palm, lay at my feet, unbroken. In its tiny, warped reflection, I saw not my own face. I saw Eleanor. She was standing alone in the empty nursery, the crib gone. The moonlight was gone. The room was dark, lit only by a single guttering candle. She wasn't crying. She was looking directly at me through the shard, her expression not sad but resigned, resolved. She raised her hand slowly, not in fear, but in farewell. Then she turned and walked towards the nursery door, the door that now stood wide open, revealing not darkness, but a soft, golden light spilling from a room beyond. She paused on the threshold, glancing back one last time. Her lips moved. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew them. "Thank you." The shard went dark, just glass. I picked it up, the edges sharp against my skin. The cuts on my arms didn't hurt any more. A deep calm settled over me, deeper than any relief. The house felt different, not lighter, fuller. The silence wasn't empty. It was listening, waiting. I carried the shard to the kitchen and placed it carefully on the windowsill, where the morning light would find it. As I cleaned the broken glass from the hallway, I didn't sweep the largest pieces away. I left them scattered on the floorboards, glinting like fallen stars. They felt like anchors, like promises. Lena came home the next day. She hugged me tightly at the door, chattering about her trip, oblivious to the change in the air. She didn't mention the missing mirror, didn't comment on the shards glinting on the floor. She just smiled, a real warm smile I hadn't seen in months. "It feels different here," she said softly, tilting her head as if listening to a distant song. Peaceful. She didn't see the frost forming on the window pane that night, spelling out 2 words in delicate crystals. He's free. I don't cover the shard on the windowsill. I let the moonlight catch it. Sometimes in the deepest quiet of 3 a.m., I stand in the hallway where the mirror hung. The floorboards are cold under my bare feet. I close my eyes, and I hear it, faint but clear. A baby's happy gurgle and a woman's soft, contented sigh, not from the nursery, from the walls, from the very bones of the house. Eleanor isn't trapped anymore. She's home, and the shadow, it's gone, banished by broken glass and a desperate act of love. But the house remembers. It holds their peace like a sacred thing. I feel it in my own bones now, the deep, quiet warmth where the cold used to live. Last night, I placed my palm flat against the wall where the mirror hung. The plaster was warm, and beneath my hand, so faint I might have imagined it, I felt a single, gentle vibration, like a heartbeat, like a lullaby. I left my hand there until dawn painted the hallway gold. The shard on the sill caught the light, glowing like a tiny sun. I know I'll see her again, not in glass, but when my own time comes. She'll be waiting at that golden door, her hand outstretched, her eyes no longer sad. She'll lead me to the quiet room beyond the nursery door, to where the crying has finally stopped, to where we all belong. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm coming home.